I'm gaveling us in. Good evening, everybody. This board work session of the Board of Education for May 9th, 2023. This is the work session for May 9th, 2023. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the Board of Meetings tab. The meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28. It will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. You can check the district website for replay times. We've got a few things on our agenda tonight. We're going to do a consent agenda, and then we're going to hear from the CDRC, have a budget discussion, and then we're going to talk about security and safety. And I'll just say right now, I woke up with a very, very sore neck today, and so I'm really good straight on, and right and left is a little bit of a challenge. So I apologize if people over here are speaking and I'm not turning. It's not intentional, but same thing, a little better on the left than the right. But just so you know, if I seem really stiff, it's me, it's not you. So with that, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Board members, if there are any items you would like to pull for discussion, we will set those aside for the next time we meet. Are there any changes, Ms. Bradford, to the consent agenda?
No.
And board members, are there any items that you would like to pull? I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Director DePass moves and Director Brim Edwards seconds. Director Constant tried hard.
I was
Oh, I thought I heard you over there. Director Constant moves. Director Brim Edwards seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any discussion or discussion of the consent agenda? I will just add, we did, I think everyone hopefully noticed that there was another field trip added at the last minute, which gives me a perfect opportunity to remind the board that once again we are approving, and in this particular case, it is a student who needs to travel, needs to get a passport, and that student is waiting on us to approve this in order to go up. And something that's very important, he has 2 adults who have offered to take him to Seattle. This is an absurd thing for the board to be approving, and it's an absurd thing for this student to be waiting on our approval for. I would, again, recommend a change to the policy. I don't think this is an administrative function. I don't think it's something that belongs at the board level. With that said, any further discussion?
On brand.
Gonna keep doing it. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on the consent agenda? The board will now vote on resolution 6699 through 6703. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. And do we have student representative McMahon with us?
She's not with us yet, doesn't it?
Okay,
No, yeah, she's at State County.
and I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have a consent agenda approved by a vote of 7-0, and student representative McMahon has not yet arrived. Consent agenda is passed. All right, let's move on to our next item. The board is now convened as the Budget Committee. The purpose of tonight is to hear recommendations from the Community Budget Review Committee, or more commonly known as CDRC. Following their report, we will hear some public comment on the proposed budget, followed by board discussion and questions for staff. With that, Mr. Kirshner, would you like to introduce the members of the CDRC?
Chair Scott, Board of Directors, Superintendent Guerrero, and distinguished staff. Good evening. For the record, my name is Roger Kirshner, last name spelled Kirchner. I am the chair of the Community Budget Review Committee, CBRC. Before presenting CBRC's analysis, evaluation, and comments on the superintendent's proposed fiscal 2023-24 budget and CBRC's report on the use of the local option levy, I want to thank my fellow committee members and name them for you. Lisa Selman, who is virtual tonight. Ilana J. Wilson. Stephen Linder. Karanja Cruz. Mariah Dula, co-chair. Deshelle Elliott, presenter tonight and virtually. Tasha Ferguson, vice chair. Paul Fries, Grace Groom, to my left. Sonia Harvey, Olympia Calvert, and Max Niederman. We're all volunteers just like you. CBRC also wishes to publicly thank Noberto Nigodillo, Jordan Cooper, and Alexander Martin for their superb support this year. Over the years, the presentation of the proposed budget has improved in its transparency. This we applaud and we support the ongoing work forward. Follows is our consensus report. Just imagine what it means. Building consensus among 13 is not easy. Achieving a consensus among 7 should be really easy. Local option levy report. The current option levy was passed by voters in 2019. Levies last for 5 years but can be renewed at any time. Currently, the local option levy generates $106,511,980. The average teacher cost, salary, taxes, and benefits, is $125,161. Using simple division, this means 851 positions were funded for the year 2022-23 school year, complying with the local option levy goal of funding at least 825 positions. CBRC is happy to report PPS is in full compliance with the promises made to the voters when they passed the current local option levy in 2019. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dayshell Elliott and Grace Groom, who will present CBRC's report on the proposed budget. Please bear in mind, CBRC is given a very short time frame in which to review a very complex and lengthy document. If we have erred anywhere, please accept our apologies. Maybe we should err each year just to verify whether it's read. Within our report are observations made based on the question and answers received by the board and CBRC. Your kind attention is directed to these and possible action is urged. Dayshell and Grace. Dayshell, you're next.
I think actually I'm gonna go first.
Oh, you're going,
Right,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Michelle. Grace Groom, a member of the CBRC and a parent of 2 students from schools and also a teacher at Markham Elementary. We're gonna start by reading the background and purpose of the CBRC. The Portland Public Schools Board of Education established the CBRC to perform the following functions: review, evaluate, and make recommendations to the board regarding the superintendent's proposed budget and any other budgetary issues the CBRC or the board identify. Monitor and advise the board on the allocation and expenditure of local option levy funds, which Roger just completed, and provide and strengthen the link between the district and school students and families. Some background and context for the creation of this report and the current status of CBRC. In fall 2022, Portland Public Schools staff implemented a more extensive and intentional community recruitment effort, resulting in CBRC receiving the highest number of applicants in its history. And the committee now has 13 community volunteers serving 3-year positions. With the expansion of the committee and successful recruitment efforts, the CBRC is composed of a larger proportion of new members. And while this brings fresh perspective, it also brings in a broad range of backgrounds and experiences. It has posed some challenges bringing new members up to speed on the district budget process and norms. To support new members as well as augment the expertise of existing members, the CBRC kindly requests that in advance of next budget for fiscal year 24-25, the committee receive more training on analyzing the budgetary documents so it can more effectively provide meaningful feedback and support to the board. The committee began meeting virtually in November of 2022, and we've convened a total of 9 times. We received presentations from Dr. Kimberly Armstrong, Chief Academic Officer, and Dr. Bernard Adams, Chief of Systems Planning and Performance, among other cabinet-level staff. The committee has engaged in 2 work sessions with the board, one on the finalization of the IPG application, and one led by the private contractor Educational Resource Strategies, for the purpose of reviewing the company's analysis of the district's effectiveness of allocations of resources. CFO Noberto Dogadillo and his staff have contributed greatly to the committee's preparation for the annual budget review. And as in previous years, there are limitations around CBRC's ability to provide a comprehensive report and recommendations to the board. In addition to the condensed review allotted time, the unexpected absence of the CFO in April presented a challenge to timely and thorough answers to the committee's questions before and after the release of the superintendent's budget on April 13 of 2023. So the purpose and focus of this budget is analysis of budget alignment with your 4 board goals. That's our primary focus. To review the extent to which the budget aligns with your board goals. And you all know your board goals, but just for the public, the general background, the 4 board goals focus on academic outcomes for students and were established through a 2019 comprehensive visioning process. The goals seek to reduce and ultimately eliminate racial disparities in academic achievement. The 4 goals target the following milestones in students' educational progression. Number 1, 3rd grade reading. Number 2, 5th grade mathematics. Number 3, 8th grade readiness. And number 4, high school graduation. The board identified benchmarks for these milestones to gauge students' progress towards realizing the Red Drip portrait in order to assess the effectiveness of investments on achieving its goals. And CBRC endorses the board goals and applauds the focus on specific benchmarks aimed at reducing and ultimately eliminating racial disparities in academic achievement, particularly for Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. Just overall reflections to frame the report. We recognize and appreciate several attempts to maintain targeted support for Black, Brown, and Indigenous students in support of the board goals. We acknowledge board's commitment to continue a focus on the core needs of students, increase academic achievements, and reduce academic disparities across racial groups. We support the district's effort to limit class sizes in K through 8 grades and maintain additional direct support for Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. Maintenance of targeted direct service and student-facing positions aligns with the board's goals. CBRC acknowledges the limitations of the district to meet the pressing needs of all students with limited funds from the state. We recommend that PPS and all PPS supporters continue to advocate for protecting and increasing the K-12 budget for Oregon school districts to achieve the quality education model. Although the average class size is lower than other larger districts across the state, CBRC recognizes that even with the Student Success Act investments, many class sizes remain unacceptably high. Additional state funding could be used to increase student-facing direct service positions, including making strategic reductions to class size in schools and grade levels or subjects that demonstrate the greatest need for additional direct service support, which could accelerate the attainment of the board goals to reduce and eliminate persistent racial disparities in academic achievement across the K-12 continuum. I'm going to read through some trends that impacted the board goals, and then Michelle's going to pick up with budgetary decisions that directly impact board goals for student achievement. So although these goals are not narrowly related to the specific board goals, we strongly recommend the board reflect and attend to these trends, as they will have a major impact on the attainment of the goals. Number 1, the trend of declining enrollment. We observe that additional funds, recurring SIA and one-time ESSER funds, along with an increase in local option levy, have been utilized to soften the budget shortfall to ongoing enrollment decline. However, CBRC is concerned that these additional funding sources are hiding the looming shortfall to ongoing enrollment decline from the general public. Staffing levels for 2023-24 budget remains stable and in some cases have improved compared to pre-pandemic levels. While the total number of teacher FTE has decreased from 2018-2019 to the proposed budget 2023-24, the teacher FTE per 1,000 students has slightly increased during that time period due to declining student enrollment. Furthermore, FTE for other staff positions in the proposed budget has increased, especially for instructional coach positions, which are not student-facing. a 70% increase, and staffing also increased for student-facing positions critical to the attainment of board goals, such as school counselors, a 17.5% increase, and FTE for special education, a 128.5 increase. Enrollment is projected to decline in the foreseeable future, which may suggest that funds for all functions, including direct teaching and instructional activities, will decrease in the coming years. While fixed costs to maintain schools as a fraction of total costs will likely increase, the end of pandemic-related funds will further exacerbate this financial tightening. So our recommendations on this trend is that the board should consider proactive steps to maintain direct service instructional FTEs amidst declining enrollment and funds. We recommend the following actions. District-wide outreach efforts to families with prospective or current elementary students currently not enrolled in PPS to better address needs and concerns as a way to revert enrollment declines. Such efforts should include recruitment of incoming kindergarten students as well as families of students who have dropped from enrollment at all levels K-12. Number 2, an analysis of spending on positions that are not student-facing as a first step, as well as thorough analysis of contracts for services that may be redundant to work assigned to district-funded positions. Number 3, reconsider any proposals for contracts to support central office functions, including but not limited to contracts for aligning the instructional framework or other initiatives that are part of the central office strategic plan. And number 4, analysis of all investments in indirect, not student-facing services should preclude any further cuts to direct service, student-facing positions. A second trend, the disproportionate increases in administrators compared to direct service staff. Analysis of the data provided on page 216 of volume 1 of the budget proposal shows that from the 2023-24 budget, the FTE for licensed staff, that's teachers, counselors, licensed support personnel such as speech pathologists, and other licensed staff who work directly with students, will decrease by 8% from the prior year. FTE for administrators, both school-based administrators and those supporting other functions in the district, are set to increase by 2%. If the school-based administrators, those working directly with students on a daily basis, are excluded from the analysis, the FTE for those non-direct service administrators is proposed to be increased by 16%. Further, from 2020 to the proposed budget of 23-24, these non-direct service administrator FTE positions have increased 50%, while FTE for licensed staff has decreased by 6% in the same time period. CBRC recommends the board closely review the added administrator positions, specifically those that are not school-based nor student-facing daily. We question why administrators are being added to support and manage fewer licensed FTE, especially during this period of declining enrollment. Number 3, a trend of deferred maintenance of PPS schools. PPS reports that deferred maintenance for all district buildings grew in excess of $400 million in fiscal year 22-23. The cumulative total for deferred maintenance now exceeds $1 billion. So CBRC recommends that the district analyze and address these maintenance needs more aggressively in the 23-24 budget cycle and develop a long-term plan to implement building upgrades. This plan could include options for leasing or selling properties not currently housing students to offset deferred maintenance costs on existing properties that house students. The fourth trend, the continued need to recruit and retain Black, Brown, and Indigenous staff for student-facing positions. We recognize the racial makeup of student-facing staff does not reflect our student populations. We know the district faces budget constraints, but we also know we cannot afford to lose ground on the early progress that has been made. To be clear, Black, Brown, and Indigenous students will stand to lose the most if we back off of our commitments to diversify student-facing staff. We recognize that there may be some budget allocation towards the mentoring of new teachers, but we still lack measures of the work being done in this area and whether it's likely to achieve the outcomes we desire and whether the investment is adequate. So CBRC recommends that PPS should maintain, expand, and monitor efforts to recruit and retain Black, Brown, and Indigenous student-facing staff in the next budget cycle. A fifth trend is the increased funding for CBO and charter schools. The state formula for alternative and community-based organizations and charter schools servicing some of the district's most historically and presently oppressed students provides for funding at 80% of the funding levels provided to students at other schools. We concur with the board's previous commitment to pass through funding at 90% of funding levels in 23-24 to CBO providing specialized services to students most in need. Additionally, we acknowledge the receipt of this year's CBO requests for increased funding from SIA funds and recommends that the board take this into consideration. A sixth trend is the trend toward increasing accessibility and transparency in budget process. CBRC supports the district's continued efforts to make the budget process more accessible and transparent to the general public. We offer these recommendations to further enhance public engagement. First, PPS should provide school-level summary budget documents to individual schools and to their PTAs to increase visibility and encourage school-level stakeholders to engage. It's also recommended that more detailed line item budgets for individual schools be made available as supplemental information. For 24-25, CBRC would benefit from additional facilitated work sessions that allow for more in-depth review and discussions of proposed budget and specific programmatic allocations. As noted in this report, PPS schools will receive ESSER school improvement grants of $100,000 to $120,000 for schools to use at their discretion to address specific needs. We recommend a more participatory budgeting process to establish how these funds will be spent. School and continuous improvement plans, SKIP, and outcomes should be shared publicly with teachers, students, parents, and community members if they're not already, to avoid siloing and othering within creation of the plans. We believe this is the best method of counteracting the perceived lack of transparency in regards to grant dollars and overall budgeting that impacts professional development, targeted intervention for a focal set of students, staffing, academic support, and other non-FTE related needs. It's important to note that individual school foundation funds should be acknowledged as inequities. Because these funds are included in the budget document making this open for CBRC review, we want to highlight the inequities here. The foundation is highlighted in the budget on page 134. CBRC has made note that some schools have more access to foundation funds than others, and this increased funding is largely available to schools serving populations of higher SES and lower percentages of Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. We encourage the district to develop strategies to decrease the inequities, including, but not limited to, policy revisions that could provide for a collective foundation district-wide to distribute collected donations in a more equitable fashion. We also recommend that providing opportunities for student involvement in how the equity allocation of 8% staffing model at targeted schools is used at the school level for increased transparency and participation by the students. And it's our recommendation that PPS implement a student participatory budget process for a portion of the budget. Participatory budgeting is a democratic process in which community members decide how to spend part of the public budget. It gives young people real autonomy over a portion of the budget, and this process builds understanding of school budgets, direct funds to pressing needs, and innovative ideas. Students and parents learn democracy while doing it, gain more understanding of complex school issues and needs, and become more engaged in their community. I've got two more trends, and then it's you, Dayshell. Seventh trend, supporting periodic review of proficiency assessment tools to measure growth. The current budget includes $1 million for MAP testing. CBRC continues to acknowledge the importance of a suite of assessment instruments that help paint a complete picture of students' social, emotional, and academic well-being. Such assessments could be conducted in balance with periodic review of grade-level curriculum and varied approaches to ensure PPS is reaching all students and abilities. The Oregon statewide assessment system has three components: the summative assessments designed for accountability purposes, interim assessments designed to support teaching and learning throughout the year, and formative assessment practices designed to support classroom-based formative assessment processes. There's a link in the document. Using these assessments that are aligned to the board goals and aligned to ODE's assessment expectations will be a better investment, as there is no associated outward costs. The resources used for MAP can be applied toward assessment literacy training for staff. The eighth overall trend is the continued application of racial equity social justice lens. Members also applied an equity lens when reviewing to help counteract the systemic and institutional barriers that Black, Brown, Indigenous, and transgender, two-spirit, queer, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and gender non-conforming students encounter within the blurred lines of a budget. We are empowered by the idea of PPS having a space for community budget review that further invokes the checks and balances needed in a large institution. We encourage the district to continue embedding equity through an intersectional lens into budget creation and implementation, as we believe it allows room for students to feel represented in multiple aspects of their PPS journey. Thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Grace. So starting off with the budgetary decisions that directly impact board goals for student achievement. First up, we have equitable and targeted direct service staffing allocations. The following are budgetary decisions that are in alignment with board goals and prioritize direct service to students. Staff has attempted to craft a budget that maintains close to current levels of direct support or is focused on investing in historically and presently oppressed students, specifically Black and Brown Indigenous students. The 23-24 budget continues the practice of determining staffing allocations based on the differentiated staffing model designed to provide more funding for direct support services in schools serving student populations with the highest need, based on SES percentages of Black, Brown, and Indigenous students in test scores. It also continues to allocate SIA funding for TSI and CSI identified schools, as well as those exiting TSI, CSI status, but in need of temporary aided support to continue their trajectories of improved student outcomes. The board has approved SIA funds to be spent on FTE for 11 kindergarten EAs at schools serving populations of 60% or more combined underserved students, and improving class size in classrooms serving students in grades K through 8, almost $7 million allocated to this endeavor. The following are budgetary decisions that do not appear to be in alignment with the board goals for student achievement. First, this budget proposes to spend over $3 million on improved arts pathways and visual and performing arts pathway support. By using SIA funds, it is unclear how this alignment with the board goals and how funds will be distributed in alignment with the board's racial educational equity policy. SIA funds are also supporting over $4 million for instructional coaches. These are not student-facing positions. The added FTE for instructional coaches are planned to be distributed equally, not equitably, across all schools serving K-8 students. It is not clear to CBRC how the decision aligns with the board's goals. It also does not seem to align with the district's racial educational equity policy. The ESSER school grants of $100 to $120K are planned to be distributed to schools equally instead of equitably by need. In practice, this will mean that schools serving lowest percentages of combined underserved students, which is schools with less than 32% of their student population made up of CU students, will receive the same financial support of ESSER grants at schools supporting student populations of much higher percentages of CU students. This allocation of resources also does not follow the board's racial educational equity policy. The ESSER grant, which will be in its last year of funding in 23-24, has been identified as the source for funding 20 FTE for learning acceleration specialists. These are student-facing positions providing targeted academic intervention support to Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. We applaud the district's plan to maintain these positions. However, we question the decision to fund these positions with one-time ESSER funds, as there will be a continuing need for such positions to reach the board's goals of eliminating the learning gaps for all our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students beyond 23-24 school year. CBRC questions the decisions to fund only 20 FTE for these positions at a cost of $2,250,000 in ESSER funds. This is in comparison to the ESSER school grants distributed equally, again, not equitably, totaling $8,759,614. And the arts pathways expenditures previously mentioned at just over $3 million. Two, the continued increased need for differentiated staffing allocations based on increased student need. The equity allocation of 8% of the staffing model at targeted schools has held steady since fiscal year 16-17. CBRC continues to support this investment and notes that the visibility in the budget book Volume 2 is a valuable tool to demonstrate a base level of transparency to the community. CBRC does question why the equity allocation percent has remained steady when the needs of our historically and currently underserved students have increased exponentially since the pandemic. Learning gaps have increased, as well as needs for social and emotional support. Our recommendations: an increase in the equity allocation that better serves students in need of the most support and aligns with the board's goals and racial educational equity policy. As with all expenditures, CBRC recommends more accurate data on returns of investment of the equity allocations to determine the impacts of such investments over time, allowing for course corrections and how these monies are spent to respond to the changing student needs and improve outcomes for students. However, only providing school-level staff allocations lack the transparency into intended uses and accountable outcomes that we wish to see. 3, continued need for targeted support in response to negative impacts of the pandemic. Similar to the most public school system, PPS was unable to address all the educational and social and emotional needs of all PPS students, which have increased since the pandemic last year. Increased support for our students who were most negatively impacted by the pandemic is critical. Specifically, Black and Brown and Indigenous students learning English as a second or other language, new immigrant students, students identified with needing special education support, and students living near or below economic poverty levels. Recommendation: at minimum, continue to maintain current levels of direct targeted investment in direct educational supports, primarily teaching staff, counselors, and educational assistants, as well as additional money to support PPS students with the highest demonstrated need for support in 23-24, especially in direct educational supports, such as teaching staff, in order to make significant headway toward academic recovery and heal from trauma caused by the pandemic, as well as pre-existing and continuing systems of oppression. Addressing support for and current concerns regarding Summer Acceleration Academy. We applaud the district's continued focus on summer programs to support students with lagging skills as a result of the pandemic. We support any efforts to close educational opportunity gaps during the summer or other intercessions. We see that the Summer Acceleration Academy, SAA, is not designed to support all our highest need students as it did in 2022. This summer, students must qualify for SAA by scoring at or above the 10th percentile on identified assessments, such as MAPS, OSAS, and DIBELs. Students scoring below the 10th percentile will not have access to SAA. Further, SAA is not providing programming for students served in focused classrooms, including but not limited to such programs as social and emotional support classrooms and intensive skills classrooms. We understand that these decisions may be based on the reduction of ESSER, as well as state funds available for summer programming. However, we recognize the importance of providing SAA for our students with the highest learning needs, not just those scoring above the 10th percentile on certain academic tests. Our recommendation: CBRC recommends that the district provide programming for students not qualifying for SAA and analyze the student population disqualified for SAA based on newly adopted standards for enrollment to determine the impact of this shift on Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. This analysis would inform future actions and align with the board's racial educational equity policy. For 5, continued and increased needs for social and emotional support for students. We recognize and appreciate the district's proposal to support social workers, school counselors, and quality mental health professionals. Positions with SIA funds. This is an appropriate use of the recurring funds to address a recurring need. We question the district's plan to fund one FTE instructional coaches at all schools while funding just 0.5 FTE for social workers. We see supporting the whole child as a necessary first step towards achieving the board's goals of improved academic achievement. We also question staffing formulas for all positions focused on meeting the social and emotional needs of students, as well as the needs as these needs have increased dramatically post-pandemic. We know that the social and emotional needs of all students have increased since the pandemic. We also know that our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students and students of lower SES suffered much more from the impacts of the pandemic than our white, more affluent students. It follows that schools with higher percentages of Black and Brown Indigenous students and populations of lower SES would have an increased need for support from school counselors. Our recommendations: invest more SIA funds in direct service positions, supporting the social and emotional needs for students, and prioritize these student-facing positions over other positions not supporting students directly on a regular basis. 1 FTE for social workers at all schools serving the highest percentages of combined underserved students. Consider reducing current staffing ratios for positions supporting social and emotional needs for students. For example, currently school counselor ratios for K through 5, K through 8 middle schools, for K through 5s and K through 8 school counselor staffing allocations are between 1 counselor to 499 students and 1 counselor to 350 students, depending on school size. For middle school, the ratio is between 1 counselor to 232 students to 1 counselor for 281 students. Differentiate staffing for school counselors and other positions that focus on social and emotional support to students to meet the differentiated levels of needs across the district. Specifically, adjust the staffing allocations for school counselors to reduce the counselor to student ratios to no more than 1 counselor per 100 students at all K through 5, K through 8, and middle schools serving the highest percentages of CU students. 6, lack of equity in allocation instructional coaches and lack of clear evidence in support of this large-scale budgetary investment. The 2023-24 budget provides for instructional coaches to implement a new curriculum across all schools rather than in a targeted fashion to address urgent and persistent achievement disparities between our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students and white students. Evidence of the effectiveness of instructional coaches with respect to student achievement is mixed. For instance, a recent 2018 meta-analysis of 60 studies reported improvement in student achievement due to instructional coaches, but noted that these improvements were smaller when applied on a larger scale. Moreover, the 2022 to 27 goals are cumulative and therefore requires a comprehensive multi-year targeted strategy that spans multiple classes, not a one-size-fits-all approach. Our recommendations: reconsider the allocation of 1 FTE instructional coaches equally across all schools instead of an equitable, more targeted fashion. Monitor how implementation of instructional coaches affects persistent disparities in student achievement for our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students in comparison to their white peers in order to evaluate and make necessary adjustments to the strategy to move toward achievement of the board's goals. We're almost at the end. 7, lack of focus on early literacy. The first of the 4 goals of the board is to accelerate achievement for students of color in order to eliminate persistent gaps in reading achievement. The board's goals are to close the opportunity and outcome gaps in 3rd grade reading between students of color and their white peers by the metrics set forth, as measured by the Oregon State Assessment System. We have African American students by 5.5 percentage points per year, Pacific Islanders by 5 percentage points per year, Native American students by 6.1 percentage points per year, Latino students by 3.9 percentage points per year, and Asian students by 2.6 percentage points per year. This budget does not include designated funds to support students directly with targeted intervention focused on early literacy K through 2 for the 23-24 school year. High dosage tutoring and learning acceleration specialists are not provided for grades K through 12, only grades 3 and up. The staffing allocations for grades K through 2 have not been sufficient to support small group targeted instruction in the general education classroom to meet the needs of all students in developing their early literacy skills. Additional FTE is provided for kindergarten EAs at schools with a student population of over 60%. Combined historically underserved if those class sizes are over 17. Our recommendations: allocate more direct service FTE to early literacy in grades K through 12 to achieve the board goal that is to ensure that all students are reading on grade level by the end of their third grade year. Consider a cap on class sizes for all kindergarten through second grade classes at schools serving populations of 40% or more combined historically underserved to 20 students. The kindergarten classrooms at schools serving a population of 40% or more combined historically underserved students were allocated a 1 EA to support small group instruction and targeted early literacy lessons in those classrooms. High dosage tutoring will be expanded to serve students starting in the third quarter of the kindergarten year, instead of starting high dosage tutoring at grade 3. The last recommendation is to increase the number of learning acceleration specialists from 20 to at least 40 and allocate the FTE at the schools serving the highest percentage of combined historically underserved students, with at least 15 of these positions supporting students in grades K through 3, with targeted intervention support to address early literacy achievement gaps. And for our closing remarks, Portland Public Schools' mission statement is: we provide rigorous, high-quality academic learning experiences that are inclusive and joyful. We disrupt racial inequities to create vibrant environments for every student to demonstrate excellence. During the budget review process, CBRC members compared the proposed 23-24 budget to board goals, to board goals that also align with the district's overriding mission. Overall, we found that the district is making strides in the correct direction of aligning the budget with the 4 goals. We also noted areas of allocation within the budget's plan that could be more in sync with the board goals. CBRC further acknowledges the ambition and intention of the budget to improve academic achievement for our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students. Subsequently, the committee recommends the district prioritize increases in direct service staff allocations in the form of learning acceleration specialists, social workers, and school counselors to meet the needs of students post-pandemic over investment in grade level standard aligned curriculum. CBRC also offers that maintaining or even reducing class sizes further by increasing teaching staff to provide more individualized attention to students would have a greater impact than the proposed increases in professional development and coaching of teaching staff. While we recognize the importance of high quality curriculum and well-trained staff, increased investments in direct service staff to support students is essential to achieving our academic aspirations. We understand that change requires innovation approaches as PPS charts unknown territory. We encourage continued reflective practice and study, collaboration with teaching staff and school communities, along with greater transparency as the district adjusts and course corrects in its journey to achieve our true north of eliminating racial academic disparities while providing educational environments in which all students can safely and joyfully thrive and excel. CBRC has welcomed the opportunity to work in concert with the district during this process. The review process looked at the impact, successes, and challenges that the budget can offer to students, teachers, and staff within the Portland Public Schools. We recognize the difficult budgeting decisions and investments that the district needs to make in order to have a budget reflective of the overall PPS community. Moving forward, we recommend a more streamlined approach in long-term investment planning, equity-focused processes, transparency, information sharing, and rationale. We encourage the district to continue pushing its own system in a way that is equitable, without a reduction of direct services to students or decreased direct service FTE. CBRC is appreciative of the district's efforts to continue growing and learning with students, staff, and community members to create a budget that is increasingly more reflective of its own mission of racial equity, inclusion, rigor, and high-quality academic learning. CBRC wishes to express its deep gratitude to Norberto Delgadillo, CFO, Jordan Cooper, Confidential Executive Assistant, and Alexandra Martin, Finance Program Manager, for their invaluable support during the current budget cycle. We especially want to thank Jordan Cooper for all their efforts to support CBRC's many new members and all of our collective efforts, especially in the absence of CFO Delgadillo, to whom we wish a speedy recovery. The following CBRC members respectfully submit this report to the PPS Board of Education: Roger Kushner, Lisa Selman, Alana Wilson, Stephen Lidner, Karanja Cruz, Mariah Dula, Deshelle Elliott, Tasha Ferguson, Paul Fries, Grace Groom, Sonia Harvey, Olympia Calvert, and Max Niederman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, appreciate that. So from a process perspective, just so the board knows, we're gonna do public comment, and then we're gonna come back to board conversation, including questions and conversation with CBRC. So at this point, we're gonna turn to public comment on the 2023-24 proposed budget. Just let me quickly review our guidelines. First, thank you. I know we have some people signed up tonight. Thank you for taking the time to attend and providing your comments. If you have any materials or items you'd like to provide to the board, you can email them to publiccomment@pps.net. And if you could just clearly state your name and spell your last name, that would be great. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. And I believe there will be a sound after 2 minutes, at which point we would appreciate if you conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have, I know we have some people signed up.
Yes. Aaron Cruz? Okay. Mark Jackson?
I think that might be the other way around.
Thank you, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good evening. Mark Jackson with REAP. Jackson, Jackson. I am the co-founder of REAP and ED, and I want to say thank you for this time today. My mother raised 4 sons by herself as an educator in this district, which I was the youngest of 4 sons. And despite her resilience and her commitment, she still needed the help of the community. Let's be clear. Secondly, I want to say that REAP has been a proud partner of this district for over 18 years. And we've worked with several leaderships in this administration, and we're so thankful for all of the services we've been provided to the students in this district. As a CBO, currently we are within the portfolio of the Racial Justice and Equity Office. And we currently serve both Lane, Kellogg, Beach, and also Mount Tabor schools. And I also want to add that as we look at this idea of emerging from the pandemic, my phone is talking to me, so I can't look at my notes. It's important to understand that we can't do this work without the community. And one thing we've learned as a nearly 2-decade partner is that the value of CBOs was elevated during this pandemic. And the type of student that we're supporting today is a new student. It's not just about teaching and learning, but ensuring we have the supports and the conditions in place for students to thrive in lieu of their social and emotional needs. That's important. I say that from a person who serves on the governor's Racial Justice Council Education Recovery Committee. I emphasize recovery. This is a process that must be informed by the needs of our students. And what REAP has provided this district for 18 years is student voice, leadership, give me some grace, also behavioral health and entrepreneurial services. We currently are moving forward with Senate Bill 421 to write into law a statewide youth collaborative that will report to the governor and all state departments to elevate student voice. We also are a current contractor with the Oregon Health Authority that administers a statewide youth advisory council focused on COVID relief and mental health supports that's funding schools and community leaders, organizations. This is the outgrowth of critical partnerships like REAP. And as you all imagine your budget going forward, this particular portfolio with racial justice and equity as a priority has to be the North Star. What you all decide this month, the state is watching, because PPS sets the tone on the direction we should go as a state. So as you all consider public comments and your budget recommendations, keep in mind It's not just about PPS. It's about the state of Oregon. And one thing we've learned as a community partner is that we leverage and we elevate the needs and voices of students. And our budget is a reflection of our values. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
He's also a preacher. I don't know if you know that.
We just learned.
Okay.
Somehow he knows how to read.
Margaret Peoples is virtual. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Margaret, can you hear us?
I can, thank you. To the Portland Public School Board, fellow education colleagues, community superintendent, I am Marguerite Peoples, last name spelled Peoples. I am a 912 math TOSA. For those of you who do not know what a teacher on special assignment is, we are teachers who support the implementation of curriculum and practices. We offer specialized pedagogical guidance to educators in the district wide, K-12, actually pre-K-12. We help with curriculum implementation, concurrently cultivating non-evaluative partnerships with our colleagues. Essentially, we're in schools every day with our teacher partners, learning and training on how to implement the curriculum. On February 2nd of this year, we learned that our line item of jobs was cut. 50 TOSAs were cut. I mentioned this to you as you look at your board goals. As we look at third grade, closing the reading gap, we have a newly adopted wit and wisdom curriculum that is complex. The reading and writing skills are different than they've ever been taught, and our teacher partners are working with us on making sure that our students are learning these new skills. There's new data mechanisms, there's new ways of evaluating. We use science, social studies, and health to provide context, meaning, and engagement for students. Without TOSA support, many of our K-5 teachers will be so overwhelmed with the implementation of the curriculum, not only in English language arts, but also in math and social studies. For our dual language programs, they are teaching in their partner language of Vietnamese, Japanese, Chinese, and Russian. Without a DLI TOSA to support, many of our partner teachers would not be able to do this in a dual language. As we look at fifth grade mathematics, this is the third year for our Ready K-5 math curriculum. There is no district math network of teachers that can help each other to understand what the curriculum is. It is with the TOSAs that teachers look at their data, they look at strategies, they look at how they are implementing the curriculum within their classrooms. They're looking at student data. They're looking at what moves and changes that they need to make. Again, we're going to look at science, social studies, and health to provide the context, meaning, and engagement. We look at our dual language students that receive their teaching in their partner language. And again, there are models where many of our students are receiving it in Japanese, Chinese, and Vietnamese. Being bilingual means that the staff knows the language well enough to be able to give not only pedagogical, but cultural ways of teaching the subject area. As we look at our high schools, there will be no content area high school TOSAs to help our teachers. As I mentioned earlier, I am a 912 math TOSA. This is the first year of the implementation of our curriculum. This year, our teachers were getting used to the materials, getting used to the layout. We recently had work groups to make up materials that were missing, such as additional assessments. We had a work group looking at grading.
If you could wrap up your last stuff, that would be great. We're a little over time.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear a bell.
I know it's hard to hear when you're virtual, so.
Thank you. Without content TOSAs, the PPS Office of Teaching and Learning is a skeleton that cannot achieve the success as described in the graduate portrait with the structures in place for next year. It lacks specific content to support the teachers. I ask the board to consider the impact of losing those human connectedness, the teacher classrooms, the more experience and practical knowledge that TOSAs bring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for testifying.
And our next one is pre-recorded by a student. I just need 1 second to pull it up.
Okay.
Ashley Wilcoxon.
I was in foster care until I was 5, so I never felt like I had the means to prioritize school just based on what was going on in my head and at home. And OLA was the first time that I ever thought I was smart and the first time that I got good grades and had connections with teachers that I never had before. And it really just changed my life. I didn't think I would graduate high school and never thought I would go to college. I didn't plan on it. When teachers would talk about going to college, I would kind of just be like, well, that conversation doesn't include me. I don't have what everybody else has. I thought there was something missing from me, and I really hated myself, thinking I would continue the cycle of not going to college. My mom didn't go to college. Her parents didn't go to college. I was really sad all around, and thinking about my future was something that made me really stressed out. And I don't think any student deserves that. Without OLA, I would not go to college. I am starting an online associate's program this summer to get my associate's in sociology. And then I hope to transfer to a 4-year university. I want other students to have this opportunity that I had, and I want them to maybe have it earlier so they can start getting their GPA up. I mean, I have to go to community college because my GPA is really not great after years of thinking I'm a failure anyway. Like, why would I try at school? With OLA, things are different, and I have hope now, finally. This is a really, really great school, and it would be a shame to close it knowing that it helps so many students, including me. So, thanks.
Thank you.
That concludes yours.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, board members, so we have heard from CBRC and we've heard public testimony tonight on the proposed budget, and we've had an opportunity to review the budget material. So at this point, I would ask if there is any board discussion, any additional questions that board members have, questions we have for the CBRC or staff as we move forward. And just as a reminder, we're scheduled to approve the superintendent's budget on May 23rd. So again, really, this is the time to surface pretty much anything that might be on your minds. So with that, I'll open the floor. Commissioner Membrance?
So, I want to say, just having been on the board for 9 years, this is probably the most thorough report from the CBRC. I really appreciate it, the analysis and the recommendations. So thank you, and I also am very appreciative that you all use the framework of our board goals for looking at whether, from your perspective, whether things were aligned with the board goals or not, because obviously our budget is one of the most important things to the tools we have to achieve our board goals. So the question, I have a lot of very specific questions about the recommendations, but I guess I'll start with a general question about the staff response to generally to the set of recommendations that were made.
Generally?
Well, I mean,
There were a lot of recommendations, so are there specific ones? That more
well,
specific, or-
I can go into specifics, but I'm just curious, so.
Yeah, no, I
I
appreciate
mean, instead of it being like a check the box, like, okay, we got the report, I'm wondering whether you all went through them and just sort of
Jonathan, you have reply.
Well, I'm going to want to answer all the questions, but I also don't want to deprive staff of the opportunity to lead a lot of strands of this work too. I want to start off by thanking our volunteer CBRC for, it's a couple volumes of work. Hopefully the upfront, the messages and some executive summaries provided some context about the direction that this important public resource, what it aims to accomplish. The intention is always to try to be as well-rounded as possible. What I appreciate about, your 12 pages of analysis and comments is what comes through loud and clear is the emphasis on our attempt should be to maximize resources that most directly impact students. So clearly we read in there, and thank you for the acknowledgements. We've been able to keep and continue to make progress towards class size. I'm proud of the fact that Portland Public Schools has early on, I think in the spirit of the student investment account, made a firm commitment to deploy support staff, particularly in our schools that need them more. The fact that we're looking to add more acceleration specialists, when we made a commitment to sort of make sure we deployed at least 20 to our students, who are identified as really needing that support. The fact that in the spirit of the SIA also that we worked as a system towards creating a more well-rounded education was a clear objective in the SSA. We think we've done that. I can think back a few years to this board being really clear around we need to make sure that pathway opportunities exist for students regardless of cluster or school they're in. So we've made a tremendous amount of progress in CTE, in closing gaps in some of our arts pathways, at least in our most underserved communities. And there's a couple key features in this particular budget. I think one, we've proceeded to emphasize other extended learning opportunities for our students. You see that in the commitment to summer school. Despite districts not having a commitment from the state with resources for that, we carved those away to make sure that we'd be able to serve, another 3,000-4,000 students, and there's still desire and demand for more. If we can do more, we'd love to do more. And we're thankful for the educators that are committed, to working to provide that service this summer. But in any high-performing school district or one that strives to be, we want to make sure and create a positive school experience for our students. We want to make sure they get the most personalized attention they can get. Class size is part of that. That we invest resources in supporting students academically, social, emotionally, mental, behavioral health. Those have all been big priorities of ours. You've heard us describe those on many evenings and in board discussions. But the other thing we realize is we have to invest not just in our students, but a school system is based on the educators and the adults that work with them, and we have to have a capacity to also support their development and coaching as well. And so what's I think a key feature in this particular budget is our move away from a centrally managed group of teachers on special assignment who get deployed across the entire school portfolio, who may come by now and then, or may have a few teachers that they're supporting, to really listening to the input from the broader community and our school leaders to say, actually, we'd like every one of our school communities to have an ability on campus to support our professional learning communities, to support new teachers, to support veteran teachers, to support all of the faculty with all of the curricular option rollouts. And so our switch in a service delivery or professional learning model from a centrally managed group of TOSAs to an even greater number of full-time instructional coaches placed at schools that we intend to network and help support in the conversations that they're having at the site level when it comes to curriculum development, practice, or data literacy, and all the continuous improvement work that we wanted to do. That was a deliberate shift. It decreased our capacity here centrally, but hopefully it's providing that more direct service to students and educators directly at the school level. So I guess just generally to answer, those are a couple of really high level overarching features that I think distinguish this particular budget proposal from prior years?
Yeah, I think what I was trying to ask was, so there's an approach, so they came up with some specific recommendations, and I'll just pick a couple, like the summer school, the fact that students in focused classrooms or the 10% aren't included, and have opportunities to attend summer school, the question about the K2 literacy and the need for supports at that age. I guess what I'm wondering is, you got the report, is there anything that you've changed in your budget based on these recommendations, or that you'd be inclined to change, especially those places where, from the committee's perspective, that it's not aligned with our board goals?
Well, we're of course continuing to study to see where adjustments can be made. We're hopeful that in the next couple of weeks, we learn that there's resources that it allows us to expand and enhance in some of these areas. If we want to hear a little bit more about how our Acceleration Academy or how our students with special needs or disabilities are going to be served this summer, I think it's going to be hugely robust. And there's still more demand, as I mentioned, to participate. We could certainly provide that. I've spoken to the recommendation of the coaches, and the shift that we're making in the delivery model there as an example. It is a direct service to our educators. Yes, it's not student serving, but we believe by raising the capacity and ability of all of our educators, we can exponentially help some more students. It's just part of the equation. So if there's one here specifically, if you want to hear on summer school, staff, I'm sure, will be prepared to talk about it.
Can I ask a quick question about the TOSIS? This is really to Ms. Peoples' testimony about the mechanics of that expertise that resides within the current cadre of TOSIS. And is it safe to assume that all of those TOSIS will be deployed as instructional coaches in the buildings, plus some?
Right, and it might not be a one-for-one because folks had that opportunity, but I'll let our chief academic officer talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Most of our TOSAs will be employed as site-based instructional coaches. I don't have the exact percentage, but I know that it's as few as 10 individuals. And so they'll be serving in that role, and we definitely appreciate and believe in the work that they have upheld the last couple of years. And we also believe that the most effective thing we can do right now is respond to community needs and building needs in terms of staffing up at the local level, so that all of our sites can have access to high quality support as they work through their high quality instructional materials. Specifically, I know that there was a point in there about the distribution being equally dispersed and not equitably. Every single one of our schools should be and is entitled to high quality instructional materials for robust teaching and professional learning support, and access to those tenets that live within our instructional framework. And so our site-based instructional coaches will be available to uphold that work. And so we don't disperse curriculum only at some sites or in some areas of our district. It's for all of our schools. And so as a result, we need to staff to respond to all of those needs that are happening across all of our 80 plus sites.
I would also say too that is it okay if I interject you? I'd also say too that the expectation is for our building leaders to be catalysts in regards to instruction. Like we're putting such a stake into the tier 1 grade level, standards aligned, culturally affirming, deeply engaging instruction. Everybody across the board, every student in PBS gets that. Right? And so in order to do that, and mind you, the instructional coach has been lauded and applauded by building leaders because, and I think superintendent mentioned it, building capacity with our teachers, who are the most important pieces, for sure building their capacity, but second to that are our building leaders. And so we're expecting them to be hand in hand in facilitating the instruction and the achievement with our kids. We're really excited about it. And I would also say too, there's a ton of research out there to support it. I get the whole student facing piece, no question about it, but we're in the midst of a dynamic shift here in regards to what I just mentioned around the grade level standards of instruction. And our folks need to not only learn the material, develop and try and improve with coaching. And so we're excited.
That's directly connected and tied to our board goals.
Correct. Director Hollins.
Yes, I just,
Is this about instructional coaches? Gotta have a follow-up on
no.
that. Do you mind if I follow up on this specifically? Well, and actually, and I'll come right back to you, Director Hollins, but it's actually a question for the CBRC, and I'm not sure who wants to answer it, if anybody, you don't have to. But throughout the report, this comes up a number of times, the sort of, the recommendation frankly to de-emphasize instructional coaches while emphasizing other things. And I'm curious, based on what you just heard from staff, was that based on some evidence that you all reviewed or other sort of beliefs in terms of what would be most effective? Because I found it a little, I'll be honest, it was just interesting to read because again, multiple times it sort of says, decrease this emphasis on instructional coaches, which the district has said very clearly is what we need to increase student achievement, and put that in other places. And I'm just curious what the recommendation was based off of.
Ask Grace to answer that.
I think the data is the achievement data that we have. We know that there are schools that have 80, 90% of our students at proficient levels, and schools that are at the opposite. So why do we have every school getting the same amount of support, the same amount of, added support and curriculum that is addressing a need that may not be there?
So can I just, is the recommendation from CBRC not so much about the effectiveness of instructional coaches, but putting instructional coaches where they're needed instead of equitably? Because as I read it, it felt like there was a recommendation to de-emphasize our funding on instructional coaches. But what I think I heard you just say is, let's be more targeted in where they go.
Right, I think we're highlighting distributing them equally rather than equitably was an issue. And also the issue of having so much invested in that compared to other investments like social workers that are half.
Okay.
Okay.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you for that answer.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, and then I know Director Concept.
The instructional coach investment was on top of schools that already received instructional coaches, like our CSI and TSI schools already had instructional coaches. So those schools have more coaches. Those schools that have the lowest achieving students on average do have more coaching support than other schools.
So those schools didn't lose support? No?
This is additional.
Director Concept.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of push back on that concept because actually our data shows that even our highest performing schools still are, still have around 30% of their students who are not at benchmark. So we have struggling students in virtually all of our schools, exception being, Access and Winter Haven, maybe one other. So we have struggling students that need supports, and those schools are often the schools that don't have other sources of support, like Dr. Adams was just talking about. They don't have those other adults in the building. So personally, I am an advocate for this additional resource that goes to every school, because otherwise those kids are not getting anything.
Director
I
Hollins.
just want to make sure that it's clear to the broader community that the coaches is a support we're making available to all schools, but it builds on our equity-centered resource allocation model. So our highest need schools, you can look through volume 2, it's very transparent, scientifically, continue to get a much larger per pupil funding, and they have benefited for years now from additional support staff. And that's how we've prioritized our needed schools. And so this is just adding on top of that an instructional capacity across the portfolio.
Great, thank you. Director Hollins.
So a couple questions, and I don't want this to get into a back and forth with recommendations versus what we're doing, but I'm assuming that we have assessed the recommendations that the CBRC has presented. And so are we looking at implementing any of their suggestions? And if so, which ones? Anybody can answer.
So I can make comment and actually in reference to Director Freeman-Edwards' question related to the recommendation on services and support for students with disabilities, specifically in focused classrooms. So, and I provided an update to the board earlier this week, but we have a pretty robust summer programming for students with disabilities, or specifically students that receive special education, including students in focused classrooms, that are served through 3 mechanisms primarily, but are actually served throughout all of our summer programming options. The first one is our extended school year program, which a significant number of our students that are more impacted by their disabilities are served in. These are students typically served in focused classrooms. In addition to that, we've been providing all year and will continue into the summer recovery services, which are specific services for students with disabilities that are provided as a result of impacts from the pandemic and learning loss at that time. Those are primarily delivered through high dosage tutoring, but we'll also have summer programming. And in response to some questions we received related to percentiles of students, this makes up a significant portion of that percentile of students that
You mean specifically under 10% achievement?
That are eligible for special education services. And then in addition to that, as I reported, and the number continues to increase because we have not completely identified all students who will be accessing Summer Acceleration Academy, but over 20% of the students who we will be serving in that program are students with disabilities who receive special education program. Last school year, we combined the programs. We combined recovery services and Summer Acceleration. And as a result of pretty significant feedback from our community, our parents, and our staff, we made a decision to separate them this year, which just has caused a little confusion, and it's why when we get questions related to that level of programming, we're reaching back out to parents to help them understand how it is we're going about serving that. But as far as in response to the recommendations, we will be serving students eligible for special education that are served in our focused classrooms in summer programming, and have been through the recovery services mechanism and ESP.
I want to come back to Director Holmes' broader question, but on this specifically, and thank you for that answer. And I'm not sure who to direct this to, but what about students that are underneath that 10% level who don't qualify for special education? How are we serving them in the summer?
So, and I would invite our Summer Acceleration people to add into whatever I can support. There's a variety of offerings this summer from in addition to Summer Acceleration with our ESG partnerships to some programming. And in addition to that, we continue to look at who can serve in our Summer Acceleration services based upon what we're able to offer. And what I mean by that is 2 things. The available staff and the amount of programming we can provide funding-wise. And so a significant number of those students are students who receive special education services, but not all. And so we will continue to explore options that make them available. That's how we're refocusing.
Yeah, and maybe if I may, I think provide a little bit more. So in addition to the Summer Learning Academies, we're providing, as Jay mentioned, supports. We're providing newcomer supports, right? So there are other summer acceleration programs as part of title efforts. So we have a Native American learning acceleration as part of our Indian American education work. In addition to the ResJ work, right? So our contractors, our partners in the ResJ community are also working in tandem with staff and getting trained around high dosage tutoring and some of the other kind of endeavors that we're looking at, so that they have tools in their programs, right? Whether you're at a SEI or a Black Parent Initiative or et cetera, that those staff also have the supports for like high dosage tutoring and other tutoring and other academic supports. So it isn't just what's happening across 18 schools through the summer program. There's an array of opportunities for students to be involved.
So here's, can I just finish this train of thought? I guess I'd like to, and that's helpful, and I know that there's a lot out there. There was also an article last week that seemed to indicate that because of funding restrictions, we were not going to be able to provide services to people at the lowest end. And so I guess what I would be interested in knowing is, as a district, can we say with certainty, we can say right now, anyone in that 10 to, what is it, 40% or 50%, I can't remember, that is going to be served by Summer Acceleration Academy. Can we say with certain kids in the 0 to 10 will get served by, and maybe it's program A, program B, program C, or program D, but can we guarantee that those students will have learning recovery in some
Look, there's 2,600 students in the 0 to 10% range, right? And so can I guarantee that every single one of those 2,600 students will be served? I can't. But what I can say is that many of these students have overlapping supports. So many of the 2,600 students are migrant ed. They are newcomers. They are Indian ed, right? So there are students that will be served. Can I guarantee that all 26? I cannot.
From a hold on a second. I'll get it from a policy perspective. Why would we make sure that students at the 30 or 40% level get served prior to the students at the 0 to 10%?
So I don't think it's a policy decision as much as it's a academic decision. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arnold.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that, and that's a great question. So there's a couple of things that we have to consider. We know that all across the nation right now, there are shortages for classrooms during the school year. So you can imagine how significantly we're impacted in the summer. And that's not an Oregon issue, that's an all across the United States issue. Last year when we ran programming, we had to blend classrooms, we had to collapse. We started off with an ideal class size of about 15, and it ended up being, in some areas, as high as 25. We're starting off this year saying that across our sites, we're set up to serve 3,000 to 4,000 students with a class size of 15. And when we look at, as Chief Bino said, the demographics of the students, we believe that every single student can benefit from enrichment and enhanced learning and targeted support. But we also have to consider our capacity and the infrastructure. So with a class size of 15, our students who are in the percentile of achieving 20 to 40% would most likely benefit with either no learning loss or showing progress. Of course, we want to show progress, but more than anything, we want to prevent what would be considered a summer slide. And so looking at the recommendation from the committee, I think it was the recommendation on re-looking at the demographics that we're serving. We have taken that recommendation under consideration, and right now we're having conversations about eliminating the math data point that we use so that we're looking only at literacy, ELA, and I think that will open up for more students to access. But our summer academy offers 80 hours of instruction over the course of the summer. And we just need to be mindful about how we're able to provide that service with adults in front of students in a classroom environment that sets them both up for success, not just the teaching, but the learning as well.
Director Brunmetter was in the Director Constant.
So I don't know if we communicated with clarity exactly how we're going to support the students. So Jonathan, we've offered some ways in which we're going to support students. There is the general information that's out there. It seems like it would be worthwhile to have it out in the broader community, the different ways we're going to support it, because I think anticipate what questions might be asked, because some questions I would have about the statement about how we're going to provide high dosage tutoring for students who are, for example, in newcomers or the Native American program. It's like, how is that actually going to happen so that people understand exactly what we're offering? Because if there's a generic statement like they're going to get it, but they're going to get it in some other programs, but they really don't. So we need to be able to actually demonstrate that they're going to get acceleration in those other programs. And then a question I had about the special ed students. What I thought I might have heard you say is that it's dependent upon the amount of staff. And so I think we need to be, the district needs to be crystal clear. For example, if we don't have enough special ed teachers that can work this summer to fill the program, and that means that we're not gonna be able to serve students, that should be stated up front. If what I think I'm hearing collective statement is like, we're gonna serve everybody that needs it, with maybe not to like the exact precise student, but like the whole spectrum. And so it seems like we need to be able to actually demonstrate that, because there's a lot of questions about whether, when you get down to the specifics, whether we are gonna actually be able to serve all students with some sort of acceleration academy. And if not having enough teachers is one of the constraints, I don't think in the summer we can say, well, we said we were gonna do it, we just don't have enough teachers, otherwise we do it.
I'll answer your first point, your first comment question. So, so we are, one of the unintended consequences of leading out with our summer acceleration news and not having the portfolio of all the offerings, I think, has created all this conversation of like, what are the options and what do I have available for my student? And so we're anticipating that that information is going to be coming in soon, and we will have a robust communication plan so that we're leading out again with our Summer Acceleration Academy information, as well as the programs that our partners are offering, so that it's comprehensive and parents can actually, and families can actually see all what's available for them. And so just to that point, we are anticipating getting that information soon, and then we'll be communicating it out.
And this is a non-educator question, but how will those partners actually provide the high dosage tutoring? I'm assuming we need educators to do that.
Yes, and there's, I think it looks like Director Soto would like to answer that question. I see her waving in the back.
Well, I'm excited about it. So I just want to share. We have been, I'm Darcy Soto, I'm the Director of Learning Acceleration. Our team has been working closely with the Racial Equity and Social Justice team as they are developing their portfolio of programs. And we have a plan for their providers to attend our professional development, both for math and reading supports, and specifically offering a session on foundational skills for reading and implementing our turnkey high dosage tutoring model that we've implemented this winter and spring in their summer programs.
I'm sorry, I just don't understand. So those are actually going to be like licensed educators providing that, or we're training we're training their individuals who are not educators, but we're going to be, the district's going to be giving them some training?
We're going to be providing them with some training on foundational skills for reading. So we have a Canvas course that's specific for training tutors who are non-educators and educators on foundational skills. It can be a brief course on how we learn to read and why we learn to read the way we learn to read. And then curriculum and support for implementing that level of tutoring in their summer.
And I appreciate that, Darcy, and I also see Danny wanting to add to that comment.
Well, I was just let the board know that the structure that we're meeting will be sort of, sharing with you the sort of process for the summer RFP for enrichment and executive learning, where you'll get to see all of the different programs, as well as we'll be able to share with you most of our plans for professional development at the scale line. I think one thing to think about, going back to Jonathan's response, is that I think as a district, we're trying to provide the opportunities in as many places as we can. So SAA is set to serve 4,000 students, and sort of like the opportunity is there. We're also combining our SUN partnership with SAA to provide that extended learning. So our SUN partners from SDI, CIRCO, Latino Network, Impact Northwest, and Parks and Recreation will be getting not only that sort of like high dosage tutoring, but we'll be going sort of like deeper this year with them around some restorative justice, some SEL, and other types of training that we've identified for the year. Separate from that are RESJ, sort of like enrichment providers. We anticipate that they'll be able to serve up to 6,000 students this year. Last year, of the over 5,000 students, 17% of those were students who either qualified for, were either labeled as special education or English language learners. And so I think that's another opportunity when we think about like being able to get to scale and offer opportunities for our folks. And then, like Jonathan said, there are other programs across high schools and across the different funded programs where we're offering opportunities for parents and students to be able to do that. Not every family is going to want to do the same thing. Not every family is going to have the same schedule. So what we're trying to do is create as many options and opportunities so that the support and the help is there in as many mediums as possible, responsive to student needs. And so, you know, we can't guarantee that students will take that up, but we can provide those opportunities in a really robust way. All the feedback that we've heard from parents have said that they appreciate the choice and the different sort of opportunities. Some students the hook is wild diversity, and that's the way that they're gonna appreciate science and get into math. And for some students, you know, the hook is their favorite teacher that they get to see during the summer, and they get to have some more specialized time with their teacher.
Thanks, Dan. Director Conte.
Well, first I want to, Byron's been trying to say something for a long time.
Yeah, sorry. I gotta work on just the speaking out part of this whole job. Which usually I feel like I'm pretty good at. But before we got really far away from this topic, but I think it's kind of overarching. I was just wondering, with the instructional coaches, are these something we're ushering in this year to help with the transition into this new curriculum, and then we'll sort of wane off instructional coaches in the following budgetary years? Or are these like an investment that we're planning to continuously have within the next couple of budgetary years?
Sure, I'll let our academic leaders talk about it. It isn't just supporting educators with adoption and implementation and fidelity of new materials. It's supporting best practice generally, pedagogy, cultural responsiveness, et cetera, for the diverse learners that they serve. So, you know, who better than an expert educator supporting a colleague educator?
Yeah, absolutely. The model is new for the fall of 23-24, but the practice, the strategies, the frame isn't. So we're phasing out of the TOSA model, which was centrally staffed, to a site-based district-supported model. So we'll be providing the professional learning and the support to the teams of instructional coaches that are out in the buildings in the fall of 23.
And then what are the accountability measures that we're taking to show, like, for next year and when we're considering in the future that, like, this new system is working? How are we measuring the progress? Or, like, do we have any official measures that we're implementing to say, here's the threshold for how well, you know, they're working when we're evaluating in the future?
Absolutely. I'll let Chief Franco speak to that on the principal end. And then I can talk about our monitoring.
Yeah, so ultimately it's our student achievement. So we have very specific indicators in regards to the board goals. So our growth in regards to those indicators will be key. Also, schools have school continuous improvement plans, which they present on 3 times a year to a final review. Where they talk about progress on their goals, and then most notably to the strategies that they've incorporated, which include and will include now the incorporation of the instructional coach, right? So they're truly enveloped instructional leader coach within the building, and it's a partnership with the building leaders. And so, and also I'd say this too, is that principal or schools will need to develop or will develop an arc of learning, right? And so we're also cognizant that instructional coaches also need support, and so we're enveloping within our use of staff meetings times where they can centrally get together to obviously calibrate around what's working and what's not, to help kind of build their practice as they work in coaching with the building. So there's a lot of those kind of embedded opportunities centrally where they can now come back and talk about how it's going. But I would say ultimately it's, you know, how are schools doing on their skips, and how are we doing in reference to our goals.
And I would say that our student achievement is going to be lagging data, right? But we're also collecting leading data. We're in schools. We need to inspect what we expect. We're in schools. We're looking to see the extent to which the curriculum is being adopted, that it is being used. That's sort of step one, because we haven't had curriculum adoptions in years, right? So we need to first get to a point where all teachers are using the adopted high quality standards aligned materials. Then they have to use it well and differentiate, and using equity lens to teach and differentiate for students, right? So this is a multi-year effort around a unified vision of teaching and learning in our instructional framework, high quality materials in the hands of every educator, and the professional learning that goes along with it.
Did you have another question, Representative McMahon?
What?
Did you have a question?
No, that answered my question.
Director Constam and then Director Bassis.
So I just wanted to go back to the issue about those that are performing at the very lowest level in our achievement testing, and I'm pretty convinced that most of those students are covered. But to me, that's a little bit upside down. Like, I would feel much more comfortable if we knew, like, each building administrator knows who those students are in their building. So if we had a way to determine, you know, what are they eligible for, who's reached out to them, what are they doing? Because I'm not comfortable not having a plan for those students. So if you guys can maybe have conversation about that. I do believe that that's probably not a lot of students. I think everybody's going to find a home through those various ways if they want it. Most of them in special ed. So I wanted to respond to that. And then generally with regard to the CBRC recommendations, I really thought that the points about where are we doubling down on early literacy were really important. And of course, you know, Jonathan, I appreciated your response today to the CBRC issue and talked about, you know, here's what the differences in our class sizes, here's the deployment of EAs. I mean, we do have a lot of structural things in play that support early literacy. And then Superintendent, I feel like I heard you say earlier that we are hopeful that we may be getting a bump in the state school fund, and we are hopeful that we may be getting some other earmarked funds specifically around evidence-based early learning strategies. So those, you know, we can't bank on those in the budget process, but.
Sure. Well, it's continued to be a priority of ours that our youngest scholars get the kind of foundational literacy they need to access content in the older grades. I'm proud that our school system, you know, over the last couple of years has been the leader in this state regarding its emphasis on early literacy. You saw not just dozens, you saw hundreds of teachers participating in many related early literacy trainings. I think that I know for a fact that it also established sort of an important exemplar for the legislative bill that's before the State House right now that has wide bipartisan support. Yours truly has been done a lot of personal advocacy on this. I believe that there will be some resources for us to continue emphasizing early literacy efforts in particular. If you want to
Yeah, I want to.
Another question. So when we talk about early literacy, are we talking about the K through 2?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, so I just would want to underscore that we have high quality instructional materials that are aligned to the science of reading in all of our classrooms. We have our K2 educators are spending 120 minutes a day on literacy. We have the WIN block for grades 1 and 2, what every student needs, I believe is, or what I need, but you know, what everyone needs ultimately. But what I need block to even double down on the interventions. And I have Senior Director Glasgow, who would probably love to even more into the weeds on all of the things that we're doing, but we're pretty proud of the work. We're actually one of the leaders in the region on being closely aligned with state standards and also being anchored to the research around the science of reading. Anything to add, Senior Director Glasgow?
That was well said. I mean, we've made a seismic shift and huge financial investments via our bonds into fully aligning with the science reading at CPS. And we are leading the state and the region, as Dr. Armstrong said, in that work. ODE is just about to publish a new early literacy framework at the end of May. We had a preview of it. And we are almost fully aligned with everything that they're asking the state to move to, over the next decade. So I think, I see things in the recommendations around intervention and around supplements and around kind of the extras we need to wrap. That's all great, and if this additional funding comes through the legislative body as we expect it to, those are places we can invest. But our huge investment right now, as Dr. Adams named and others have named, is core instruction. Every child, every day, 120 minutes of science and reading, aligned instruction, plus this additional, right? And that's not something we've had prior to this. That's new and it's exciting, and all this professional learning and coaching is gonna support that really taking hold for our kids.
Thank you. Director Pass and then.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to just appreciate the CBRC, your really thoughtful analysis, your recitation of the trends and the ones that you wrote recommendations for, particularly the trend number 2, the disproportionate increases in admin compared to direct service staff. I appreciated the trend number 5 where it had 0 recommendations. That was the one that was talked about increased funding from CBO in charter schools. I also appreciate calling out the distribution of the ESSER funds as equal and not equitable, of the 100,000 to 120,000. My question is on trend number 2, which is the trend of disproportionate increases in admin compared to direct service staff, and you've got about, it looks like 5 recommendations if the district has a response to that. And further, does the district, I think to Director Holland's point, has the district taken a look at the recommendations the CBRC has laid out and taken some into consideration? Are there some that are excellent, or are there some that are, not worth your time or attention? Which one of these sound like good ideas?
Yeah, no, I'll maybe take the first stab at
Maybe
this.
that's not a good question. Maybe it's not which ones are good ideas.
Yeah,
Which
no.
of these might
They
be
all warrant
considered?
us carefully studying and reading them. There are many areas where we would not disagree. We were just talking about early literacy. If resources come, there's some targeted places we can enhance. Interventions, reading specialists, etc. This one in particular around sort of admin, like how do we
Yeah,
that
it's
kind
not
of
a
piqued our
popular
antenna.
question,
Like
but it's
I don't know that there's a bunch of extra admin walking around, but when you look year over year, where is that coming from? How does it come through in the book? How do we understand that? Maybe you could illuminate a little bit here, because that one had us scratching our head a little bit, to try to understand.
The amendment specifically talks about the year over year either increase or decrease, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts.
Your general.
Yeah, so Director DePaz, so the FTE information on page 216, which is where this is based on, follows ODE's nomenclature for recording the data from an accounting perspective. So it includes all funding sources such as the bond, et cetera, et cetera. So it would be a false assumption to assess who provides services to students and who does not come from these tables, just as it would be inaccurate to determine from this table who is the central office staff and who is not. So therefore, we would want to understand better how CBRC calculated their numbers for admin that are not school facing. So for example, there's over 20 licensed administrators who are assigned to the central office as dictated by PBAM, or the kind of that page 216, whose primary activities are to assess and improve the well-being of students as part of their special education program. So we also have staff at the central office who support instructional activities as part of Head Start, as another example. A more insightful way to assess FTE across our programs would be to look at the table on page 97, which provides a more department breakdown of FTEs funded by the general fund. Then similarly, on page 111 and 125, they share those pages share the FTE data on grants such as Title I and SIA. I also want to highlight that the specific year-over-year changes, particularly from 2020 to 2021, was due to COVID operations, as this was a big part of our financial story. Most of the central office administration increases that occurred between 2020 and 2021, which was about 49%, primarily in instructional support services. This is when we navigated COVID at its peak and invested more in centralized supports for students, obviously because we didn't have brick and mortars available. So this included, for example, building out and then providing an online or hybrid programming during the in-person shutdown. So from 2021 to 2024 proposed, the average year-over-year change comes to roughly 2.7 increase in staffing. This also aligns where we are post-pandemic, and we're still prioritizing the learning recovery while creating new opportunities to re-engage our students.
Just to follow up on that, since you have it, it's like all written down, could you?
It almost as if you anticipated the
Could
question.
you share that with us? 'Cause-
It's in your box.
Okay, so because last year in the budget cycle, we had this whole question like we're decreasing. It's a decrease in outside the classroom staff. At the end of the day, actually, it turns out it was a decrease and a projected increase. But that wasn't until like I think in June that we got that number, and I think we're especially in the same thing as with last year when we're cutting classroom teaching positions because of enrollment cuts, that we have to, because everybody sees those, it's just like everybody like if you can't get into the summer program, you know you can't get into the summer program, but if you got in, we probably don't hear from you. But everybody sees the reductions in classrooms, teachers. So it'd be helpful to be super transparent about where those are so that we can talk about it, because everybody knows that we have fewer teachers. And if it's like, hey, these were one time because of the pandemic and we had to staff up, that's good to know. But it should be transparent and be able to show that to the community at the same time that we're being asked to make cuts in staff because of enrollment cuts.
So I'm going to go to Director Green in a second, but on this point specifically, and I know you all have heard me before, and it's kind of a comment to the CBRC, and obviously you can respond if you want. This CBRC report talks repeatedly about the need to potentially cut some of the central office positions to put them in schools. And if my memory serves, that's a departure from prior CBRC recommendations, which were concerned, and I think for a number of years, about the extensive cuts that had been taken to central office and how that was hampering things. And I'm going to continue to say what I always say. I think this distinction, it's a false distinction and one that does damage to our district. When we talk about a student-facing position that is somehow good and a non-student position that is somehow bad. And I'll just comment. I mean, we're talking about instructional coaches because we need all those student-facing positions to do a really good job. Some of our internal administrative positions are also really important. I hear you also in the report talk about the need to hire teachers generally, right, and staff generally, because we have staffing shortage, but particularly diverse teachers. And hiring and bringing in teachers of color requires an army of HR recruiters who can go out and identify and find and recruit and get them in here and then retain and onboard, do all that work. Every one of those is a non-classroom facing position. We often hear about communication failures in this district with parents, with the community, with schools, within schools. Those communication positions are often usually central facing positions. We hear about the lack of, and I think our IT actually is pretty good in this district, but we hear people's concerns about that IT. And again, those are central facing positions. So for me, I agree 100%. The need to review those positions closely and make sure that they are effective and that they are needed positions. We should do that every single year. I think where I disagree is getting into this dichotomy of, oh, you've seen an increase here and a decrease here, and putting a value judgment on that. What I'm really interested in is first making sure we have the accurate numbers, because I think that's important, and just for the community, as Director Edwards said, to communicate. But then really being really clear about the fact that if there are increases and decreases in certain places, let's talk about why and what those folks are doing, because I think a lot of those positions can be very helpful in our schools, and they can be really helpful for our board goals as well.
Well, I guess the other thing I would say is, so I don't know if all these answers were shared with, because I'm looking in my inbox and can't find it, but apparently it came right before the meeting. So I guess, and this goes back to my very first question, is like, what's the staff response to the report, because it seems like there's some things where, hey, there's additional information, or you already had something prepared, but it would be helpful to have that not just sent to board members, but also to the broader community. I mean, I didn't.
So you want a written response direct from
Well, to say, hey, you have in your inbox is like, well, I was driving here. And so.
I don't think it was a criticism, we're just letting you know it came in this
Well,
afternoon.
but it's also like anybody else who read the posted material, if there's a good response to it, that should be, I think this raises,
I
I
agree.
think this raises questions.
I agree.
And
So we will provide an update,
Yeah.
a written update that provides more, that contextualizes all of this so that our broader community is informed of the contextualizing of the situation and not just the number that they hear, and then that becomes the driving narrative.
well, on all these things, it may come down to like, you answer a lot of questions that are out in the community, because if the CRC team had those questions, then a lot of other people, and they looked at it in detail, a lot of other people have the same questions, so you're gonna answer some questions. And then some things, it's just gonna be a policy choice, and that's okay too, there may just be differences in policy, but at least then we've answered
Absolutely.
a lot of questions.
Great. Director Green?
I think she's fighting it.
I was just gonna say, we heard earlier that we have a more diverse CDRC and we have input from different voices, and so, you know, we would expect that the recommendations would look a little bit different this year, because we've got a broader set of stakeholders.
You had 4 people
Contributing to the
continue and 9 new members this year, so.
Yes,
so
and
that reflects the change, and to build a consensus is a political process where you merge divergent points of view to accomplish a common purpose. So that's reflective in what your recommendations are this year over previous years. So.
thank you, and I appreciate the change, thank you.
And I'd like to respond quickly to your point, Director Scott, about the good and the bad. That was not the intention, and I apologize if that's how it came across. The observation was that, and I'm speaking from a teacher hat here, a licensed administrator, their main purpose is overseeing licensed teachers. And I'm noticing licensed teaching staff going down, licensed administrators going up. That needed to be pointed out.
Yeah, no, and it's a good trend to look at and figure out why. I appreciate that, yeah. And thank you. Director Green.
Thank you. I'll try to write down some stuff. I want to say to everybody, great job. Y'all did a phenomenal job. I love that. And I felt like the soup was over here. At a moment I felt like it was Family Feud. And I was like, good answer.
Trying to stay relevant.
Like, this is awesome.
Well, you got the soup for a theme?
It's like, hey, that went through, it went through just like, okay, I like it. But so, I want to speak to, I wrote down some stuff, the high dose tutoring, because I'm not the sharpest knife in the deck. So I wrote down, so would this be considered like we're partnering with our CBOs or outside agencies who are going to have staff that we're going to provide some level of curriculum or material to them, and then they're going to turn around and explain that and why it's important to, our team is going to explain it to their team why it's important, and then they're going to turn around and issue it out.
Yes, the idea is that we're providing professional learning opportunities.
So like train type situation.
Exactly.
So this could be somebody's grandmother who decides that she wants to
Right now,
do
it's
training.
comfort folks who are, they're providing the summer enrichment.
Right, so if the summer enrichment people that we're working with, if their staff, if they hire somebody's grandmother because they need somebody to do the tutoring, then this could technically be somebody's grandmother who is saying, I wanna come in and do the tutoring, we're gonna do train the trainer, and then they're gonna turn around and train the kids.
For this summer, we're
It could be a
requiring-
teenager, maybe
we're
it's not a
requiring
grandmother.
that all summer staff attend the PD.
Okay.
So if
But we
they're
can't
within
control their
area
summer
of
staff.
students, yes, we can, legal contract. They're providing services to children, we
Mhm.
have set the expectation in the contract that they'll attend the PD that's offered.
Right, so they'll attend, so they'll send their staff, I just wanna be very clear.
Yes, it's not
They're
a training
sending
program.
their staff,
Yeah.
whom they define as this is our staff, this is our team. We're going to in turn take our material and teach it to their team, and then their team is going to go back and teach it to the kids. Is there any type of certification that we're going to make outside of they coming to the training that they're going to get, that we can say you're a certified trainer person?
No, and what I would say is that we aren't requiring that they then use this. We're saying this is another tool in your quiver. We hope that you will take this and begin to continue to align your services. We have some of our summer providers who do not work with us year round. The idea is that as we go into the fall, we will offer the same training to our year-round providers. We will create tighter expectations around wanting to see how their programming aligns to our instructional framework and these resources that we're providing.
So they're not even, technically for the summer, they're not even at this point required to have to use this. This is a good arrow, it shoots straight, and if you use it, it could work type situation.
And what we've heard from our partners is the
Well,
more
this
we're
isn't
being
a
better.
right, wrong, or different, this is just clarity. I mean, I'm a guy, like, let's make it crisp. And so that a third grader watching, the third grader understands exactly what they're getting. So that's why I'm asking very specific, detailed oriented questions.
They're gonna have to do some alignment, right, because they're not offering typical classroom settings, right? So we have a partner that's gonna be doing playwriting, right?
Mhm.
So the high dosage tutoring and the English language, fundamentals that they're getting can definitely enhance that work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, no
But
doubt.
they're not necessarily gonna, use the curriculum the same way that this, SAA teacher will be using. It's another way for them to think about and adapt their materials and to give them resources so that the enrichment really aligns with what we're trying to do.
Okay? You respond.
Well, I think it's a really exciting opportunity for the summer.
Absolutely, I got more exciting
to do,
questions to come.
And we're piloting this this summer
Pilot, I like the word pilot, but go ahead.
in anticipation of being able to roll out, more clear and guided expectations for the school year, as Danny mentioned. The idea is that we are providing them with the training that they need for tutors to understand the how and why of foundational skills work for students. And then we are providing them with a model to implement 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week for their students, and the curriculum and assessments that are paired with that model that we've used during our high dosage tutoring program this winter and spring. So we've been using this, we've gotten good results from it, and so we're ready to move that forward into our summer.
Makes perfect sense. Which goes to my next, I like the idea that we're recognizing that it's a pilot, it's an idea, meaning that it's a concept, it's something that we're thinking about, something that we're trying. The word idea means that it's fresh, it's not proven. But it is a model that, we know has worked in other places. I'm just saying because this is a lot of money, and I wanna make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, so with that in mind, I wrote down a few other questions. How are we, measuring the progress? Are we setting intro baselines as well as exit baselines? Meaning that when the individuals come into the program, are we establishing something? It may not be where, can you read, but can you comprehend? Because that's also another big thing, because it's like, it's not enough if you can read all the letters, but you do understand what you read. So how are we measuring our reading, as well as the comprehension? Then what data are they going to be required to capture and report back to us? Do we have a model template of a report model that they should be using and bringing back to us? Do they understand how to use that report model? And report back to us. How often, and somebody's transcribing this, so I'm just running all these down because I know that, we're NASA for God's sake. How often will this data be captured? And how are we monitoring the retention? Let me explain that in case somebody is not clear on what I'm clear about in my mind, but possibly not in yours. Oftentimes programs, in an effort to make sure that their numbers look good, will kick out the kids that are doing bad prior to reporting time, because then 100% of my kids can read, but I kicked out 65% of my kids. So how are we ensuring that the number of kids that the people started with are the same number of kids that they ended with, and that the baseline that we captured in the beginning matches what we expect to see in the end?
Director Green, are you okay having those operational questions answered outside of this meeting in the interest of time?
As long as it gets done. So I have no problem with y'all getting back to me, but I'm gonna go back to Julia's thing, because we all, it's great to have the information and to know it and be able to spit it out. It's better when we make it public for the world to see. So I have no problem with, that's why I said I was listing it out in a litany, because I'm sure somebody in here, we got Dr. Adams over there, and data is his thing. Data is his thing, and so I know he's got all this information. He's NASA, for God's sake. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. We got a room full of people just backing stuff up. So as long as we can get that back to me.
And so let's make sure the community doesn't understand, there will be a rich menu of academic supports and enrichment opportunities for our students, depending on resources, depending on who accepts our invitations. We're going to try to maximize those invitations to as many students,
Right.
as
And
are
I just want to
interested.
make sure we're clear. The reason for this is I'm associating dollars to, are we getting what we're supposed to be paying for? Because what we don't want to do is get in the space of, I'm gonna give these guys some money because I like them. They're a good black organization, and they said they were going to work with black kids, and they said that they were helping black kids. But the black kids that are leaving that program still can't read. And so we still gave you money because you're a black organization. And then you come in, and this is not about Mark, because I know Mark is helping people read. And I like Mark. Mark is my guy. But you got black organizations that come in and they beat the drum and they rally all these people to say, y'all are cutting out my money and I am a community program. But at the end of the day, I'll say it, if I say it today, it's still true tomorrow. If you're not helping our kids get better, then you're making the problem worse. And I'm not going to give money or continue to fund programs that cannot prove that they're doing what they say they're going to do. And I think that should be our bottom line across the board. I mean, I'm only in charge of the budget.
Well, I'd love to give a quick answer. Really quick.
Well, what it's already 8 o'clock, and I don't want to shortchange the discussion if the board wants to continue it. I'm wondering if we can capture those as part of our Q&A, which gets back and is both made public, right? So it's public facing and also gets back to us in terms of our virtual.
But can we have Dr. Armstrong respond?
Sure.
We have a pre and post assessment, and we progress monitor every 5 lessons.
In addition, we don't kick students out, but we do monitor attendance because it matters if you attended every day versus you only came for a day.
Well, I'm not concerned about us. I'm concerned about the programs that we're partnering with, kicking the kids out before they get back to us.
Thank you.
So it's not us that I'm concerned about, because I know we give you 10 days before we kick you out. I'm talking about the programs that we partner with and we do a contract with. And then we say, how many number of students are you going to work with? And they say, we've got 25 students or 35 students because we pay them based on the number of students that they have, hypothetically speaking, or something like that. So then we start giving you funding based on the number of students that you say that you're going to support. And then halfway through the program, some of those kids start failing because we have a 75% rate that says you have to be, doing 75%, increase or better, something. Random number, I just threw that out. But then all of a sudden they're getting close to not meeting that. So what they do is they kick out a few kids so that they can keep that ratio up, because percentages is just based on the.
Okay.
Somebody else is biting at the bit?
No one does that.
Don't make me get on public TV and call out people's names.
Maybe you guys should have a
I think this is
conversation
an important
about that.
conversation that we can have. But we're an hour over. I want to get to Director Lowry and anyone else who has any final questions about the budget, because we have another public safety and security recommendations. Director Lowry, anything to add?
Thank you. I tried to hop in there at one point during the discussion. It's hard to be virtual, and I apologize. I should be be back next time. I think one of the interesting things about as we hear the recommendations from CBRC about this notion of student facing is that I think that the instructional coaches are this opportunity to be, instead of located in a central office, be located in buildings, and that this is a response to trying to address what we've heard from building leaders. And so, Ms. Groom, I hear your question about the difference between equity and equality, and some concern that we're doing these instructional coaches to all schools, not based on the needs. And I think that's a really good thing and a good question to be asking. How do we, if this model works, that we're deploying these to schools, how do we look at increasing that in the future? Another thing is I'm hearing from my sources that we're not going to see an increase in the state school fund. And in fact, we're seeing a decrease to the early learning and literacy program as well. So I think we continue to need to be concerned and thoughtful about the direction of funding in this state, and to be really clear with our leaders. We've spent a lot of time in this room tonight talking about how we're going to use the limited resources we have to do the best we can for our kids. And I know that Superintendent Guerrero and others have been working really hard to talk to our state about funding, but I think that goes back to some of the key needs that we need to really fund education appropriately in Oregon. And I believe if we did so, some of the societal problems we're seeing right now would not be as much of a factor if we had those resources and opportunities for our children from an early age. I think PPS is doing the best they can, and I so deeply appreciate CVRC's thoughtful questions on how do we take the limited resources we have and invest them in ways that bring about the board goals. And I appreciate the deep questions my colleagues have asked tonight as well. I think going last means I get to say the least because y'all covered most of it already.
I have one last question for the CVRC. So this is the first report from the CVRC that I have received that doesn't talk about the reserves. And so are we to assume that that means that you guys are fine with what the superintendent has proposed in this budget? Did you have discussion around it? Because normally you are really beating that drum.
Our discussion was limited on reserves this go around. We do not favor drawing them down below where they are at the present time. In fact, we applaud any effort to build them back up to get to the board goal of 15%. That's having been on the CVRC the longest period of time. I was on the committee when Rita Moore was on the committee, and that's when the board policy was adopted, and we're firm believers in that policy.
And that was the main impetus for us working so hard to increase our reserves, was getting hammered by the CVRC every year.
That's right, and any notion of spending it down, as I've often reminded people, we had an outlying district in the metro area that spent down its reserves entirely and laid off 340 teachers the very next year. So we don't want to do that.
Okay. Just as a reminder, as I mentioned, we're scheduled to approve the superintendent's budget on May 23rd, and we are now recessed as the budget committee. Reconvene as the regular Portland School Board in a work session. Next up, we're going to talk about safety and security work recommendations. Superintendent, would you like to introduce this topic?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We're proud to be able to share with you what we've heard from community representative stakeholders across the district. On the topic of school safety and security, it's been on all of our minds. I don't have to remind us. Our community, our schools have been impacted by no shortage of gun violence and other issues. They're not all gun or shooting related. We've heard from our students all the other ways that school climate and safety concerns are important to them. And so we don't want our school communities to be places where safety something our students are feeling. We want our schools to be positive learning environments. So a few months ago, I launched a safety and security task force to seek input from our community to review our current state of safety and security measures as a district, take a fresh look at it, hear from our students and any other representatives, to try to arrive at opinions and recommendations to share with the school board. So our Chief of Staff, Jonathan Garcia, has been leading that effort to bring folks together and capture what we've heard, and we're excited to share with you what some of those themes were and a set of recommendations for us to ponder.
Awesome. Thank you, Superintendent. And given how late we are, I'm going to make a big assumption. There's 31 pages in front of you. We're not going to go through all of those in detail, but we'll try to provide a little bit of an overview. And joining me also here at the table is Molly Romay, who is our Senior Director of Security and Emergency Management Services. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so let's get started. You can see the table of contents here. In short, and I'll just reiterate what the superintendent said. He launched the Safety and Security Task Force with the aim of reviewing our safety measures with fresh eyes. And the recommendations that we are discussing today are based on input from our community. When I say our community, I mean students, educators, staff, families, and as well as reviewing existing safety and security policies and protocols. I want to underline that our community's experiences are diverse and very complex. Our community is not a monolith, right? So what we attempted to do is to lift up the voices that we heard in a way that allowed us to understand that people experience a sense of safety and security differently. And so to that end, these are the 12 recommendations, or 13 recommendations, I apologize, that we have. All of our recommendations are grounded on these principles, right? Ensuring a joyful and positive learning experience for every student every day. As an example, right, we've heard a lot about students not wanting, and staff not wanting our schools to turn into prison-like environments, right? So how do we make sure that in providing safety and security, we're ensuring joyful and positive learning experiences every day? Again, one of the things that we heard loud and clear from all aspects of our community is that the disparities that negatively impact our students of color is of a concern. And as we move into these principles and these recommendations, that we want to make sure that anything that we push forward is actually helping eliminate, not exacerbate disparities. And the last thing is really about not last thing, but there are many bullets here that I am highlighting a few. This idea of nurturing shared responsibility and accountability for the safety and security of our students, staff, and schools. That means what I heard loud and clear, what we heard loud and clear is that we need everybody to have the same commitment and the same responsibility for the safety of our schools, our students, and our staff. So again, without going into details here, too many details, the process followed this. We had a task force that the superintendent launched. This task force visited schools, reviewed and discussed input and recommendations. We researched the solutions, but more importantly, and most importantly, we lifted up the voices of our community through focus groups and community input. We hosted over 12 focus groups with students, staff, and educators. We also connected with the families at events. So, whether it was a play or a sporting event, we were there. We had our community agents there asking similar questions, and the beauty of that was that these were actually the opportunities to solicit voices of color, right? Our Black, our Brown, our Asian communities, our parents who come to their school, for the event, to celebrate their children, to see their children, participate in these events. In addition, we did a survey which generated 300 responses. And as you can imagine, those responses tend to be folks that are active online. So again, we try to do a concerted effort of listening to different voices. What you heard, so I'm going to stop at 8:20. I think We started at 8:05, so.
You're doing fantastic, Jonathan.
Great. So you all probably have seen a version of this. When we think about when we think about school security, there are usually 5 components to school security. When we talk about people, what is the role of human beings in the safety and security of our schools? How do we use equipment and technology in the appropriate way? How do we continue to advance with technology? What are the policies and procedures that we have, training drills and exercises that we provide our staff and our students? And ultimately, what is the building design of our new, of all of our infrastructure? So these are the 5 elements of foundational, or elements of school security. We spent some time in 4 or 5 slides providing you what we're already doing. And I just want to highlight a few. We do have a 59-person team in our security and emergency management services, including 42 campus associates. We do continue to provide mental health social workers and counselors. In fact, at all of our middle schools, they receive a minimum of 2 counselors, which would make a ratio of 250 to 1. At our high schools, we have a ratio of about 300 to 1. The American School Counselor Association recommends a ratio of 250 to 1. Another area to highlight around people is we have many community-based supports. And currently we're working with Monomani ESD to establish Rivercrest Academy, which is a sober and supportive school for students recovering from substance abuse, right? And so that looks to launch here in the fall. So that's another type of work that we're actively working on.
Is that just high school or is that
Correct.
6 through 12? Okay.
I believe it's high school. Yeah, I believe it's high school.
Real high school was.
Say that one more time.
It's
The idea of
in
a
line.
recovery high school, yes.
Yep.
MESD
So
is taking
this
that.
is it?
This is it.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is it. This is the Recovery High School, but it's managed in MSD with support.
And it has an actual name now and everything.
Correct. When we think about building design, equipment, and technology, again, I won't go into details here other than to say one of the things that we keep hearing is about surveillance cameras, right? And needing more of those. So we've began the process of installing cameras this month, and Dan can speak more to those details if we need be. We plan to use, again, this is about $26.5 million from our bond, and this is how we're using the majority of that to improve surveillance cameras across our district. In addition, we are hard at work making sure all of our classroom doors have upgraded locks. We are at this point around 40 schools that have replaced all of their doors with 2 new sites being upgraded per week. And we expect to be done by the summer of 2023.
I just want to add to that.
Please.
Piece for the Lockheed hardware piece. Now, there's a lot of folks out in the community. I want to make sure that we're clear. Every school don't have it yet. We're working on it, so we want to make sure that folks understand that yes, we are doing it. We're in process. It's not done, and we're going to continue to go until it's done. So I think what happens is a lot of stuff that I'm hearing is, well, my school don't have it, or my school don't have that. It's coming. We're getting there. So I just wanted to make sure I just highlighted that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Can I ask, so this is such a detailed question, but are we talking about door hardware or doors?
Door hardware,
Okay, hardware, not doors.
not doors. And thank you for the
Some doors,
clarification.
if we have to switch them out, so some doors are being replaced, but it's to make the door hardware work. Yeah. but
Okay, so
overall,
it's-
it's an actual hardware that allows for push button locks inside the classroom. So essentially anybody could secure themselves into that space without currently
Okay,
the hardware requires a key.
Okay, it's not changing the swing necessarily, it's changing the door so the hardware works within the chip.
Exactly.
Won't read much of the policies and procedures here. You can you've seen much of this. We have a robust emergency operations plan that's available online for folks to review. We have a myriad of student success and health programs and supports available to students, whether that's crisis recovery, supports for our LGBT students, again, supports around substance abuse and substance use, suicide prevention and intervention, Title IX as a few examples. We also provide regular drills and trainings for our students, staff throughout the year. So again, that was all the current actions that we have on the table. What you'll see here in the next slide is a summary of those 13 recommendations that the task force is pushing forward. So I'll go through these pretty quickly, and happy to provide more details than what's on this one slide, although you will see them spread out through the rest of the deck. So number one, we want to make sure to grow the campus safety team across our middle schools and our high schools and expand their hours. Particularly what we are proposing is adding campus safety so that every middle school has at least one campus safety associate and our high schools have at least 4. So right now our high schools range from 2 to 3 to maybe 4 at some locations, but this would standardize 4 campus safety across all of our high schools. What this would do is expand also their service hours from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from our students and our staff was that, hey, our campus life is beyond 3:30. It is beyond the normal, when the bell rings. It actually probably begins in many ways when the bell rings after work, so that students attend, sports and activities and an array of stuff. So the idea here is that we would expand our security services through at least 8 p.m. Monday through Friday.
At the high school.
At the high schools, thank you. The second recommendation here is to grow our youth violence prevention team. As you all know, Ronnie and Mustafa play a critical role on our team to provide supports, particularly to those students who are, engaged in activity that we wouldn't want them to be involved. These are the folks that are supporting, providing counseling, providing supports, and an array of services. The addition of 2 FTE, 2 additional staff members on the youth violence prevention team would allow us to go down into our middle schools and our elementary schools. We know that a lot of activity is beginning at those early grades, and so wanting to make sure that we have the tools and the people to provide prevention and additional supports. The third item around people is a partnership with the Portland Police Bureau. We recommend reestablishing and reimagining the Youth Services Division. More specifically, we look to create an agreement with a pilot to begin this upcoming fall, outlining roles, rules, responsibilities, etc. The fourth one I'm actually really excited about. I'm excited about all of them, but particularly number 4, because one of the things that we heard from our students particularly was that while they feel safe at school, when they're in the buildings, there are a lot of feelings of fear coming to and from school. And so this idea came really from a number of places, from our students, but came from our research. So when you look at school districts like Chicago Public Schools and a number of other major urban districts, they actually have some community walking patrols. These are community members that are placed around school communities to provide that adult, that safe adult, that trusted adult that can, greet them in the morning, that can encourage them to get to class, even if they're 3 or 4 blocks away. So we want to pilot this across 5 schools. What schools those are, yet to be determined. But the idea is, imagine having community members, folks in the neighborhood, right, uncle, auntie, that we hire to stand 4 or 5 blocks or near that market store, that you see a lot of activity, right, or a lot of busy intersections, right? Having an adult there that says, hey, with a vest, hey, get your butt to class, or what are you doing, etc. So the idea here is to pilot, just like other districts have done it, and move and see how that goes. So those are the 4 people recommendations.
Yeah, he said higher.
Yeah, higher. So moving on to equipment and technology, there's a bill at the legislature, HB 3101, that would require school districts to implement a rapid incident response system. So we want to get ahead of that. What does that look like? And so we have a recommendation around implementing this system so that adults are empowered to seek additional supports from other campus safety personnel, including our administrators. We also, given our athletic events and the multitude of events that happen with community present, we also want to pilot a roving weapons detection system at key entry points of major high school events. So imagine as you walk into the PIL basketball tournament, you walk through a roving weapons detection system. Now these are different from metal detectors because what we know about metal detectors is that they have a lot of metals, right? It's slow to go through. They're not necessarily effective. They capture a lot more than what this current technology does, which is capture weapons in particular, right? So we're looking at that as a recommendation. The other two recommendations, so those are equipment and technology. Training drills and exercises. We talk about yes.
Can I ask you about that? Can you at some point provide, not now, but just like where that's being deployed somewhere else? Because it seems like all the major sporting events and big events still use the other system.
Absolutely. Happy to provide, that information, for sure.
I would just share that we had a really good conversation on the topic of weapons detection versus metal detectors with a lot of council senior staff who are working through some of the same issues. We have lots of examples of the ways that they're deploying different types of weapons detection systems. So, it'd be good to share some of that research we did.
Okay, I went over, so I'm gonna speed up here. When it comes to trainings, drills, and exercises, two recommendations. One is to create and implement a set of mandatory live and in-person safety trainings for our staff, right? So that's one. We also want to inventory, replenish, and prepare all of our emergency kits. When it comes to policies and procedures, a few that stand out here require all of our middle and high school students to display school ID badges at all times while on campus. We want to establish a district-wide protocol that supports and provides accountability so that students are in attendance, ready to learn in our classrooms. We also want to create a district-wide protocol and a menu of supports following an event of traumatic impact for both students and staff. Launch a campaign so that students know their rights and know what programs are available to them, what services are available to them, if they need help, this is how to get it. And the last thing is, again, continuing to review and refine our crisis communication to ensure we've reached a variety of stakeholders. So I'll stop there, Chair Scott. Happy to go into detail with any one of these recommendations as the board chooses.
Great. No, I appreciate the presentation, and of course we've had the report and we've had to look through it and see these. So I think at this point we'll open it up to the board for questions, comments, thoughts. Again, Superintendent, you really tonight are looking for sort of general thoughts and opinions from the board. Is this the right approach? Is there something that's missing? Are there particular things that we like that we want to make sure we emphasize?
Yeah, we certainly wanted to lift up some of the themes and propose solutions that we were able to sort of investigate to be responsive. I want to thank everybody that participated in lending input. I know board members like I had a chance to sit in a number of student focus groups. A lot of the safety concerns, oftentimes we're just wanting to know what number to call, what resource exists. So a lot of this is a campaign of education that we could do a continued better job. But yes, looking, how do these sound to our directors? As our, budget and resources kind of gets refined in the coming weeks, we'd like to really be able to sort of support these recommendations as much as possible and as fully as possible.
I can start with, so I was on the task force, so I can keep my comments pretty short. Ultimately, I was really happy with a lot of the things that came up, and I was glad with the ultimate decision to just work in partnership with the Portland Police Bureau, purely, in improving their current programs rather than re-implementing them in our schools. And I was happy with, that decision as our group sort of talked about our relationship with police. I think the biggest thing that I would like to say, just as sort of a closing note, I definitely agree with everything that you're seeing on this slide, and I was very happy with it. But I think the most important thing is this is not a done conversation. I think that in the years to come, especially since I will be here next year, another big thing that we heard from students is this is a conversation we should be having all the time, and it shouldn't be the result of a traumatic experience that we've suddenly decided to talk about the issue of student safety. And I've been talking with central staff who I help facilitate some of these student meetings with. For example, we had one at Franklin, we had one at the Student Summit. And I think it's just also that ongoing conversation helps to build trust. And when establishing student safety, obviously trust is one of the most important elements of that relationship. And so I think as much as we can do even in this year and the years coming, to just keep this issue at the front of our minds, even if we do see, hopefully, with the investments that the state and the county is making in preventing gun violence, hopefully we won't see the same events occurring that they did this year. And then also just a lot of students talked about this idea of like things are happening outside the building, and a lot of the stuff that we've seen going on is sort of outside the control of PBS. But ultimately what we can control is how we respond to those things, and also like what experience do students get? Because I think the other thing was, and I think to call out number 11 and number 12, a lot of students get really inconsistent experiences after a traumatic event occurs, and we can't expect our educators to be able to walk every student through like what's happening when they themselves are processing and when those in our community are. But I think as much as the district can lean in to try to establish a protocol so that students know what to expect. For example, Jefferson students shouldn't wonder whether the day after a shooting they're going to go back to school or not. And so I think those sort of things where we can give people a standard of here is the care that we offer, here's what you can expect, and there's some more consistency on how we deal with issues, keeping in mind, of course, that they vary depending on what happened. But just giving people that sense of like, there is something that we do, and there is something that we are doing. And that is not a conversation that we're closing now because the task force has made their recommendation. And thank you to all the work that I know Jonathan and our superintendent and all of our staff, and Molly took time and her team took time out of their day, and James Loveland took time out of his day, as well as some of his staff to come down and make these listening sessions with students possible. And I think the more we can do that sort of thing on a more regular basis will just really help to build the relationship of trust with students, which is what I think from this process I'm learning I think we need most when addressing student safety.
We're going in a circle.
We can. Director Pass.
So I like a lot of the summary, especially the things that are kind of trauma informed, and I've got most of them circled. I did have a question about the partnering with Portland Police, because we don't have enough police to police the adults in our community. And even though we're hiring a little here and a little there, we're not gonna see bodies on the street for probably a year or 18 months. So that's a question I have, and I would hope that that's a, hand-holding, like a woo-woo relationship, not a like, we want people, that are armed in schools. And then the other question I had was, some of these ideas, implementations, potentials have costs associated with it. I separated them out from like one-time costs and annual. The annual cost is 2.1 million, 2.15 million annually. The one-time costs total $700,000 plus the $150,000 per location. That would be for, I can't remember the detail, but it was $150,000 per location. And so I'm just wondering, like, it was it for alarm detection. I think it was a detection system. I did there. So yeah, I'm wondering the weapons detection system. Where do we come up with a budget for this, and when? It's a lot of money. I think it's necessary to keep our students safe and a feeling of safety. I also want to appreciate Jonathan you calling out that safety means different things for different people in different communities, and there's no one way we can't define safety for all of our stakeholders. So yeah, I'm curious about the budget, how we came up with the numbers. Are these just round numbers for consideration, or actually where are we gonna get? Where are we gonna find this piece?
Sure, I'll answer the youth division question first. So our conversations with our chief, the chief of police, is aligned to what you just said, right? They are on the way to growing their workforce, their police force, and so we cannot expect a turnkey overnight that we will have, all PPP staff available to us. So the idea here would be that if we move in this direction, is that we would implement and pilot something, probably at a couple of schools, 2 or 3 schools, or again, I don't know what that looks like. That is all part of the conversation that we need to have with the Bureau moving forward about what that looks like. Over time, to your point, we believe that if, in partnership with the Bureau, that we can, get it to the level that I think is appropriate for our school district.
I also want to be really clear that I'm not, just because of my own lived experience, a fan of, any arms in our schools. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not a fan of the policing, like a heavy police presence in our schools, and I am in favor of the walking patrols, the community patrols. I want to be one of those community patrols. And if I see kids in my neighborhood, I'm like, do you know your grandmother's here? Does your grandmother know you're here right now? You're supposed to be in school.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of benefit to having these eyes on the street for kids. I'm really in favor of some of the softer touch ideas, the community support. Less so on the, the police that we actually don't have here yet.
Yeah, and I think I want to make sure to underline what we heard from our students, which, and it's in one of the slides here. But folks really express, this feeling about not having guns or hall monitors with guns, right? However, it's about how do you ensure that we have a positive relationship with law enforcement that goes beyond, you only call 911 when there's an emergency. How do we build relationships in the classroom? How do we build relationships in the hallways, in the ways in which the adults, these law enforcement adults, interact with our students, right? You have to remember that the youth division law enforcement officers would be trained in restorative practices, in de-escalation. You run the gamut of the type of supports, because again, these are the people that we want to make sure are working with young people and understand the nuance of working with young people, right? Because our young people are learning and growing and shifting every single day, and we want adults, just like our educators, adults, who can understand those youth development, if you will.
Yes.
And in terms of dollars and costs, as we've discussed here, so the superintendent initially earmarked about $500,000 towards safety and security. Obviously, the dollars that you outlined are much larger than that. Yes. Luckily, we were able to, work with OHA around health and safety related to Filters, thank you. Filters. So as you noted in the budget proposal earlier in the month, we had $1.5 or so million allocated for that purpose. We have the opportunity to use those $1.5 million to move towards health or safety and security. The last piece I will say is that there are a number of resources, both at the state, federal level, that we are eyeing. There's a lot of interest and a lot of money coming down the pipe around safety and security. So we have our strategic partnerships fundraising team actively looking at all of those. And in addition, with HB 3101, we anticipate that the legislature will earmark dollars to support these types of that emergency plan or the emergency response system. So of course, as you can imagine, PPS continues to always braid the variety of resources that we have to make these initiatives follow through on these initiatives.
So to start with 2 process observations. One, I want to thank you for adding the Cleveland and Franklin administrators to the task force. There were 2 schools that saw elevated levels of gun violence around the schools last year, so I appreciate their inclusion in it and having their inform their decisions. And then second, just to echo Director DePass, I appreciated also the conversations with students were around what types of things make them feel safe. So letting students define, as one perspective, what safety meant. And then in terms of the actual recommendations, and I say this with the living in the zone and representing the zone of Franklin and a lot of Cleveland, but not all of Cleveland, where there's been escalating gun violence in the community. That I appreciate the holistic approach, that there's not just one strategy, but multiple strategies. So just quick reflections on some of the strategies. Yes, continuing the work on the physical building security upgrades. I think those are tangible ways in which community members can see some very obvious things that make our buildings safer. In terms of very supportive of the school ID badges. I'm a little bit surprised we don't have those already. It's just an easy way to know who belongs, who doesn't. Also very supportive of the community health and violence prevention workers as a community-based strategy to reduce the cycle of gun violence. Had an opportunity to visit with Rosemary Anderson, POIC, community care teams, and sort of their engagement and how they run to disrupt violence versus running away from it. And then the high expectations piece of attendance, I think, is often overlooked but critical. I have had students who went to a school in which if you weren't in the door by 8 o'clock, you weren't playing sports after school, or a variety of things. So, being clear about our expectations, and what I've always heard from students is you set the expectations and we will meet them, but if they're low, we'll meet them.
With Director Bernard, I would say, I heard that, I was about to say the exact same word, so that's what I heard from a number of students even today, right? Give us the expectations and we will set them, and we will meet them.
I had a son for 9 years. I never once moved fast to get into school until there was an expectation if you didn't get into school by the day, that literally got out of the car and ran.
Right.
So, and I think we just need to be consistent so that there's not different sets of rules at different schools, and again, not denying necessarily kids, but setting the expectations. And then, so the partnership with the police bureau. And this isn't a comment of a for or against comment, but I would like to know a lot more about what the rebuild and reimagine, the partnership with the Youth Services Division could look like. Because when the resource officers were removed, it actually wasn't we only had partial coverage, so people thought, hey, we have school resource officers. It actually wasn't really a very cohesive, comprehensive system. So I want to look, what does that look like, the type of training? I would be interested in where the best practices, what the best practices are, and what that looks like, since this is not school resources officers in the school, but near them, or around them. So what's the best practice? I will say, just from Southeast, where there's just elevated levels of gun violence in the community, that I hear from a lot of parents an interest in having greater visibility of the police bureau as a way to sort of diminish gun violence in the broader community. It's not necessarily they're concerned about the students, but they're at least student on student gun violence, but more what's happening in the community coming into schools. And then a question I have, which again, this is more about having different strategies, but here's one of the examples of whether it's the campus safety associate or a police officer with the Youth Services Division. But our schools all are different, and so having better approach, I would hope we'd have a customized approach. So for example, Rosa Parks, which is an elementary school, which would need some presence, or it may not be in the pilot of the community walking group, they actually, to get to their gym, have to walk across a parking lot, and teachers have told me they don't feel safe taking their kids necessarily all the time, walking across the parking lot. Or where, let's take Franklin, where you have a big park next to it, where it's not PPS property, you don't really have control over it. And it's the largest high school, do we need more campus safety associates than the 4 than say another school that is more confined and is smaller? So I hope that we will have some customization depending on the physical setting, the number of students, and what the adjacencies are. I'm assuming at some point, if we have a relationship, that there's a contract, and what I would hope is there's a lot of conversations with this school board about the parameters of the contract before it actually comes to, when you get to that point, because it's.
Yeah, and what I would suspect is exactly what you just outlined. When you know, if based on the conversation today, we hear that there's a desire to move forward in building a relationship, the next immediate step is for the superintendent and I and others to get together with, you know, the chief of police, with Molly, to begin to think about what that implementation structure looks like. And in addition, how do we incorporate student voice in that along the way, so that the IGA or whatever agreement is informed by both students. But we want to make sure that ultimately, as the folks who would approve the contract, that you are also in the know. So we'll try to work through an implementation plan that brings you in those at those right moments.
And I think the last thing I want to add is I think it's important to note that we already have a relationship with the police bureau. So there's all kinds of things that happen at our school that unfortunately require us to call the police, and sometimes it's health related, a whole host of things of why we might call. So it's not like now all of a sudden we're gonna have a relationship, but maybe more structured with, and having officers who are specifically trained but not in the schools.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hollis.
I like all of it. I think when we are talking about the safety of our kids, you know, I don't think there is no rock unturned or something that we can do to make sure for their safety. You know, when we talk about, you know, our board goals, when we're talking about, you know, the vision for PPS, you know, kids are not feeling safe in the school, it's going to be hard to obtain those goals and those visions. So, and it sounds like we found the money, so I'm loving it. So, yeah, I'm for all of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo those comments. I think the task force did a fantastic job of coming up with a multi-pronged approach. We've talked before about how this is not a binary issue about doing A or doing B or doing C. It's about doing everything, and I really appreciate that in here. I think you've captured a lot of the nuance, and you've captured a lot of the spectrum of services that our kids need. You know, and yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm gonna agree with Director Hollins on that. And I'm excited to see this move forward, and I'm excited also about the iterative approach, right? We're piloting things, we're trying things, we're moving through things, and this is not static. This is not, we're gonna do it, and you know, we're gonna do it and we're gonna try. And we may be adding new things as we go forward, and we may be taking other things. I think that makes a lot of sense. One, it's a relatively small point, but I think an important one. It just stuck with me. In our policies and procedures, you talk about Title IX supports, and I think you're referring to existing supports, right? And specifically saying that we have confidential advocates for students to navigate the system. Well, that's an existing practice. One of the things I would just ask, because it doesn't show up as a summary because I think we're already doing it, but making sure that's working really well and taking a look at it. I was really impacted by the student focus group that I went to. And, you know, we're asking them about security and safety and, you know, what's impacting them. And I'm imagining we're going to hear about shootings and violence in the community and how that's impacting. And instead, we heard from more than one student who said it's actually feeling safe from some of their classmates. They told some pretty harrowing stories. And I think making sure, and those are complicated situations, I want to be really clear, like this is not, you know, there is no one size fits all approach. I love the idea that we provide them with advocates who can help them navigate that system. And I just want to make sure that is truly a robust and effective program. And we're really reaching out and providing those resources to everyone who needs them, particularly in our high schools. Thanks.
I wanna, first, I think this is really, really great work, and it's very complicated, and you've got, you know, some technical fixes, some equipment fixes, some culture fixes, some process and protocol fixes. I mean, it's really complicated, and I think it's really good, and I want to appreciate the engagement that happened, because I see some things in here that are very specifically connected to what we heard in those focus groups. You know, I'll never forget one young woman talking about how she had her little sister text her every single day when she got to school and when she got home after school. And she said, we only live, you know, we only live 2 blocks from our school. She goes, but I'm looking for that text every day to make sure that she got there. And so, you know, then I see the walking patrols. So I think that engagement was really authentic and really useful. And, you know, one question I have around the Portland Police Bureau is there are a lot of details to work out. So what I thought was interesting in the language here is near. So our students, for the most part, don't really want to see armed, uniformed officers in their school. But they do want to know that they've got their back somehow. So the way you characterized it is near. So I'll just be interested to see, like, what does that mean and what does that look like, and you know, how flexible is our police bureau going to be with us in reimagining a different way of doing things? And I actually have a lot of confidence in Chief Lavelle and his passion and commitment around this issue based on his personal experience. So I think we can do it together, but it's going to take a lot of work on the details. And then, of course, also, you know, talking about cost. Like last time, they tried to exact a cost for what otherwise was, you know, the service that they're supposed to be providing various, you know, our community in all different ways, shapes, and forms. So that'll be an interesting conversation. And I like the focus on attendance because not just because we know that's better for kids, but because we know that when they're not in school, that it's when they're cutting class that a lot of these nefarious activities are going on. So if we can address that problem by increasing the likelihood that they're in class and by communicating with them and their guardians when they're not in class, like maybe you're also helping to address the root cause of the problem in addition to helping their learning. Yeah, and of course, you know, our youth violence prevention team, those relationships are absolutely priceless that they have, and there's only 2 of them, and they're still making a huge impact right now. So double that impact, I'm all for that.
Again, I'm agree with everybody else. I love it. Not only and the only things that I have questions about are, one, the walking patrols, because you said we're gonna pilot 5 schools. So I guess my questions are around, have we mapped out, it's probably gonna be to Dr. Adams because it's gonna be all data. Have we mapped out the data of all of our Portland Public Schools to identify these are the areas where we've seen gun violence within our city and the zip code where which that data falls within our schools, to identify what 5 schools are going to need it, or we just pull it out the 5 schools that have experienced it. So if we look at trends, sort of like a dot map, we should be able to put, if we go back maybe right before COVID up until now, and we put a red dot everywhere that there's been a level of gun violence based on the zip code, and then we look at the schools that are around that zip code and the things that are within that space, whether it be a park, whether it be a church, whether it be a community center, where those things happening, because that would help us to identify what schools we actually need to select. And it would be based on the data around, these are the schools that are more prone to have gun violence based on the trends, versus these are the ones that just saw it now. Mm-hmm. It would also show us where our gun violence is moving, the direction and where which is going. We may see that it starts in one place and then it moves in another. But I guess I'm just curious around, if we don't have that, prior to enlisting all of this, is there an effort to collect all of that data, put it together, create a scatter plot for us to look at so that we can say, this is why we're choosing these schools. This is why we're choosing these areas. This is why we're choosing, because if you said in the thing it was listed that we were gonna do, basically those are safe walkways. So safe walkways is what we're talking about now. That's all that is. And that's that is a national model, a secure violence model. And so based on that, these are the areas where we actually need people posted. That's also going to tell you what people you actually need to get. And so I'm very curious about that, because that's going to make a difference. I also want to say, for the record, since we're on the record, that I am a proponent of law enforcement and getting our officers back in the buildings. And I know I shouldn't say this because I'm a school board member and I'm an elected official. I don't really care what the kids say. I don't care how they feel about it, honestly, because at the end of the day, we got kids hanging on the side of the street and we tell them you can't stay there simply because you don't want to be there. You have to go to school. So we say, get back in school. I don't care if you don't want to go to school. You have to be there. So if we recognize that there are areas where, I know this isn't what you want, but it's what you need, then we gotta deal with it. And some, people don't like to say that because it's like for re-election or for politics and stuff like that. That's not cool. But when you just don't care, and I'm just a community guy and I've always been this way, I don't really care. Your frontal lobe hasn't even developed yet fully, so you don't even know what you don't know at this point. And I done forgot more stuff than you know. So I don't want to hear it, as far as like when it comes to safety. This is a safety thing. And so I don't really care. I'm a fan. I'm saying it for the record.
You do care.
And that's what I'm saying. I'm a fan. I'm saying it for the record because I don't want there to be any mistake in the community. Herman, I'm sorry, you were saying?
My frontal lobe is
You're a girl that's
for this.
You don't even want to break down the whole frontal lobe process and how we begin to. No. No, I'm just saying. This is probably. But what I'm saying is, for the community at large that may be concerned about whether or not Herman Green is for or against, I'm tired of seeing our schools get shot up. I'm tired of seeing all this stuff happen in and around our schools. And I'm tired of us waiting forever to get somebody there to respond to it. Our CSA officers, as much as we like them and think, they are not in a position to stop somebody that comes into our building with a gun. They're not. It's not their job. It shouldn't be their job. It shouldn't even be something that we ask them to do. Even the students say they're great hall monitors that they make me feel good about being there. But how many of them want to put their life in front of somebody with a weapon? That's a law enforcement officer's job. That's his job. And I expect him to do it. And I'd like to see them in our spaces so that if that situation arises, that they can do it. If nothing else, it becomes a deterrent because they know that there's somebody else there. So that's just my thoughts on it. Because we got a camera too, and so let them know too.
Thank you, Director Lowry.
I am gonna just say that I think it's really important that we actually listen to our students talk about how they feel about safety. And I understand your point, Director Green, that we need to, as adults, sometimes weigh in. But I also think students have experiences that we need to listen to and consider. And I think Director Constam really brought that up of how these recommendations are tied to some of the traumas and struggles that our students have faced. My question is about the security cameras that I know that, and I've done quite a bit of reading about metal detectors and the lack of efficacy, especially in schools for metal detectors. And I'm wondering as we're putting in more surveillance and security cameras, are those preventative? Like, is there data that shows if there are cameras in schools that it prevents incidents, or are we putting in security cameras more for like an accountability so we can see what happened? or as a, like, we can respond more quickly as things are observed. And that goes to the question of, okay, cameras are great, who's watching them and how are those being monitored? Because that's ultimately, your cameras are only as good as your people.
Yeah, I can answer that. I think it's all of the things, Director Lowry. I think we use them for deterrence, detection, and then also to provide evidence, right? I know in our modernized schools, what we've heard from my principals and staff is they have seen a decline in some of the nefarious activities that are happening in hallways, because students know that there are surveillance cameras in those hallways, and so that has deterred, some of those activities. We are not currently staffed with in a way to have somebody continuously monitoring surveillance cameras. School staff have access to those cameras, but they're not currently being actively monitored. So we do use them for all sort of three things that you pointed out.
Is there a place that I can do some further reading on data around surveillance cameras in schools? And if you can just email me that would be great.
Yeah, I'm happy to send some information out to you. I was actually just looking here from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They develop a K-12 security guide every year. And it's part, CCTVs, these security cameras are part of the detection kind of apparatus. But obviously, as it talks about in this research here, it isn't just about the cameras, it's about the cameras in connection to, staff, right? And other things. So I'm happy to send you more information so you can dive into it. Great.
Thank you. And I really support the recommendations that you brought forward. And I'm very thankful that, I love the, I think Superintendent Guerrero always talks about PBS being a learning institution. And I know our staff are always thinking through the best ways to approach things. So the idea that we've freed up money in another area so that we can really focus on some of these key issues that'll help protect student safety. As far as SROs go, I'm definitely someone who's having them outside the building and beginning to rebuild that relationship. I could see a point in the future where we may have SROs back in buildings. I really like that idea of violence disruptors. And so whatever that may look like in the future as we've redeveloped that relationship. And I really think, we as adults can say, we're going to put the officers in and they're going to help our students. But if we don't do the groundwork of helping our students feel safe with the officers and know how to be in relationship with them other than just like in an emergency or in a crisis, that's on us for not preparing our kids. So I think what I see here is this very thoughtful, how do we shift culture so that we have a robust sense of safety in all the ways that like I always appreciate Director DePass, how you raise that safety means different things to different people and that takes relationship and that takes people. So, and Molly, I just want to thank you for your team and all of your work and the incredible way, like you make me feel safe just as a person, but I know you're working hard to do that for all of our students every day.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up. I'm actually going to let the person with the largest frontal lobe have the last word.
I'm sorry, and I feel like this is just a testament to our relation, Herman, because I feel very comfortable just disagreeing with you. But I genuinely think it's like very dangerous to say you can have a voice in all these issues and we're a student-centered district, and then student safety is just kind of kicked from that group. And I think relationship with police and the experiences that you have differs greatly. I've obviously been very vocal about the fact I don't think police belongs in school, and I think that's corroborated by a lot of my peers, but that differs depending on who you are. But I think that students not only should be at the center of this issue, but they are at the center of this issue. It's called student safety for a reason, and the second that we lose sight of who we're serving here is when we have a board have really failed in our job. And so I encourage every single person here, don't kick students out of the equation just because we have a developed frontal lobe. We disagree with your opinions. Take into account what we think, because we are the people you are impacting. And maybe my frontal lobe isn't developed, but you haven't been in a school for 20 years.
Thank you.
Not longer.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the conversation tonight.
Just want to check the direction, Chair. I think what I heard from every board member is taking all prudent measures, particularly those in this in this set of recommendations. You know, there's resources to pursue. There's, you know, further steps we need to take on every single one of these areas. Some we'll be able to do immediately. Some will continue to roll out. I love the idea of checking in on how these are going. The signal from you all to support the next level of conversations that need to happen with our partners at PPP. Get back to what made the previous program, what were the good aspects of it, and what does a rebranded effort maybe need to look like. What we're talking about is dedicated officers working in communication with our school leaders in our school system. So we look forward to sort of those conversations moving forward. Taking that we should proceed. Now, if you recall, at our last meeting, I told you there were probably two areas where if we see any adjustment in our resources moving in the right direction, we're going to want to put our support. This was one of them. The others are middle school supports. That's another area where we've all been sort of experiencing the challenges there. So staff has been working together to jigsaw a similarly comprehensive plan about how to continue enhancing the middle grades support. So you'll be hearing some more details related to that.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent.
Speaking of middle schools, I'm sorry, what specifically in here, you said the last meeting that there were 8 FTE? Are those, you don't need to answer now, but can we have it sent out to board members about what middle schools have campus safety associates, which ones would be getting it through this proposal, and then what about the K-8s?
Yes. So one of our first.
So we'll answer that question
inventory, so we can
offline.
answer
Thank
your
you.
question.
And we're going to adjourn this meeting. The next regular meeting of the board is May 23rd. We're going to take a 5-minute break and we'll reconvene. Kara, are we in the other room? We'll reconvene an executive session in 5 minutes.
I want to go home.